Hey,
Hey, welcome everybody to our Salem's Lot live discussion. I don't have like a fancy intro or nothing set up because this one's kind of like an off episode. It's not a official walk along the beams episode, but it kind of ties in. Um, we might have another guest. I'm kind of unclear there, but my one guest is gonna be Phil Tastic. What's up, Phil? Nice to have you here.
what's going on, everybody?
We don't have a lot of people that showed up, but of course we just got started. Usually I'm doing the intro and blah blah blah. So far we got Carmen. Hey Carmen, thanks for stopping by. Um, for all those on the rewind and all those that tune in right now, I'm gonna warn you. There's heavily spoilers. That's how I do these things. I go into great detail. Um, I not only try and keep the chat up to date. I kind of give a bio on that. This one, there is a ton of information in this book. I love this book, man. Um, Technically, on this reading, this will be the fourth time I've read this book now. Um, so let's get into it. Salem's Lot, originally copyright in 1975. To context to the Dark Tower series, the Gunslinger was originally copywritten in 82. And technically, this is his second novel. His first novel was Carrie. So he kind of did this back to back, and then his third novel is The Shining, I think. So I mean, he did this back to back horror thing in the beginning, and of course, King of Horror kind of thing. So I'm just gonna dive straight into the book, and I have a couple questions woven in, but most of the questions will come to the end. Um, so Phil, with that being said, a lot of this is gonna be narrative. So if you want to dip out for a second, give me about 20 minutes, and I'll breeze through this.
Go for it. I'll sit here. I'll draw. I'll try to look pretty.
Um, so we have author's note. It starts out, Stephen King's basically thanking all the many people that were attributed to this book. And what's up, James? Thanks for stopping by. Um, in the audiobook version, there is an opening credits where Stephen King explains his reasoning for wanting to do this as his second book. Checking out, vampires and just kind of explaining how vampires were attached into his life, how his mom allowed him to read this stuff but didn't really like it, kind of thing. But it predominantly is focused on Bram Stoker's Dracula, that original novel, Hammer films that predominantly focused on a more gorier version of vampires, and then some EC comics and Tales from the Crypt, that kind of version of vampires and stuff. But so he basically acknowledges that. And then we straight get into it. It's a prologue. A man and a boy make three stops: Rhode Island, Youngstown, Ohio, California, before traveling across the border to Los Zapatos, Mexico. The man checks newspapers and writes his current book. The man is searching stories on Jerusalem's Lot, or Salem's Lot, better known. Reads an article about Salem's Lot being a ghost town, gives accounts on certain people that are missing or moved out, possibilities of UFOs, the occult. Um, this he basically kind of stores these stories, kind of thing. What's up, Kenneth? Kenneth, thanks for stopping by. Um, the man takes the boy to a church looking for a home for the boy. The boy confesses to a priest uh, afterward. The priest gives prayer. The man and the boy head back to Salem's Lot. Again, this is kind of a rough draft version of it. There's a lot that happened. This is kind of um, a catch up. So the book is actually broken into three chapters. Each chapter has like individual chapters that are broken into smaller individual chapters. It's really confusing because it's like chapter three, sub chapter, mini chapter. I don't even know how to word it. It's so fun. So we get part one, the Marston house, chapter one, Ben. We meet Ben Myers heading back to Salem's Lot. Once lived there when he was a child. Mentions a motorcycle accident involving his wife. Notices the city has changed, but not by much. Stops by the Marston house, an infamous house within that city. He wants to rent it, finds out it's already rented. We go on to chapter two, which is Susan. We meet Susan Norton at the park reading one of Ben's books, Air Dance. She notices his picture on the back cover, talks about his other book, Conway's Daughter. They head to Spencer's, share ice cream sodas, talks of Susan one day leaving the lot. Susan is an artist. Ben has come to the lot to write a new book, mentions Ben lived there in the lot for a period of 4 years. Mom and Ben moved around until his mother passed away, and he kept bouncing around. Um, they make a movie date. We meet Parker Gillespie, the town deputy. They notice, and he notices and discusses Ben. Ben wants to rent the Marston house from the realtor Larry Crockett, recently rented out. Ben is staying at Eve's boarding house instead. They also mention Susan's ex, Floyd Tibbetts, and a brief history of the lot, starting with the name. And basically, Jerusalem's lot gets its name from a pig pen. It was a farmer that lived, and he had a pig that was named Salem, and Salem would get out of her lot. Or was it the other way around? Was it Jerusalem? Something like that. I think maybe the pig's name was Jerusalem or
Yeah, I think it was Jerusalem.
Jerusalem, and Jerusalem will get out of its lot, and that's where the name of the town, came from. So Jerusalem's lot is actually just, I mean, Salem's lot is actually just a shorter version of Jerusalem's lot. It's just, you just minus the Jeru and you have Salem's lot. It's actually showcased in both movies where it's like a sign that you can see it's been decayed off or whatever. All right. We jump to a scene where we meet Ann Norton, Susan's mom, and Susan explains meeting Ben. Mom not liking Ben instantly, using tabloid news and reasons not to like him, and still wanting Susan and Floyd to marry. Afterwards, Ann calls the town gossip Mabel Wirtz and asks about Ben. Ben and Susan go to the movies. On the way back, they discuss the Marston house, talk of Hubie Marston and Bertie Marston and their horrible demise, which comes up about 3 times in the book. But you find out like way early on that it's just this murder scene, but then you kind of get more of the details. And it's still like throughout the book, it's still never fully discussed on what went down, just kind of the final events and some of the things he was doing right up to their demise. Okay, Huber kills Bertie by shooting her with a shotgun to the head and offs himself by hanging himself, and that's where they find him. Ben tells Susan about being dared to go into the Marston house. They go inside at the age. He goes inside at the age of 9, makes it to Hubie's bedroom, and actually sees Hubert hanging dead from the rafters. Runs out with a snow globe as proof that he was in there. Part of the reason for the new book has to do with his obsession with the house. They they head back to Eve's, sit on the porch, they kiss for the first time, set up a next date for the next night. Lights are seen on at the Marston house. Um, and I'm going to get to my first question for Phil. How does the town of Salem's Lot serve as a character throughout the book? In what ways does, setting the influence of these events during the story influence the way you look upon the city? How did King use the city as a character?
Well, I think that I should point out to people. Mike just went over this in a few minutes. What he just read, it was literally, for me at least, I was doing the audio version, days of listening. So King definitely took his time fleshing out the town and the residents of this town.
Oh,
At first, I think by fleshing out the residents, you get this idea: hey, this is this kind of quaint little, you know, true traffic light kind of place. And then as you get closer and closer to some of the characters, they're not generally not good people, and that's very kind of central to why what happens in this book happens in this book. Do you want me to go into the couple with the baby, or you want to? I don't know
no,
if I'm
we'll
jumping
wait.
too
We'll
far
wait
ahead.
on that. We'll wait on
Okay.
that. Yeah, because there's going to be discussion there, and I know that's an need that we'll get like a warning when we get there.
Yeah.
Because again, this is a horror novel, and not everything horror related. There's always monsters, and there's some real world horror stuff in it. He touches bases with some of those things in this book. Um, all right, so let's move. And Phil did mention this, but yeah, that was a lot of the book. He is very descriptive as far as like everything that's going on in the town, what the town looks like, what it's feeling like, the time of day. Like technically, this whole story is like 2 years long, and really, it's kind of the end of the story that adds that much time into the whole story. It's when they do that whole little trip and then come back. But still, like 2 years, for one is a long time.
Oh
All
yeah.
right, so we go chapter 3, the lot. Days start at 4 a.m. in the lot. It's expressed sunrise. We pass along with several of the daily workers that jump into even Eva Miller and Weasel Craig, boarding house handyman, making breakfast. We jump to Sandy McDougal, and this is where I'm going to have to do the warning people that this scene coming up, I could see how it could rub people the wrong way. It could affect you in ways that you did, especially if you have kids. That this is a tough scene. And I have it. It's so it's so I have it highlighted in the part to remind me like, oh, this is the danger area. Um, we jump to Sandy McDougal, and the book does that a lot. It jumps from like character to character. It gives you a little piece of them and this. But the piece we get about Sandy McDougal, uh, we jump to Sandy McDougal, a young new mother with toddler Randy McDougal. Randy cries from neglect, and Sandy throws a bottle at his head. Then, after he starts crying due to her throwing the bottle on his head, she proceeds to punch him twice in the face, and not like light love taps. She, you know, full force punches this baby. Sandy notices that her husband Roy might notices the new bruises and plans to lie to him and cover up that she actually hit the baby. We jump to Mike Ryerson, 27, works a couple of odd jobs, including part time for Carl Foreman, the lot's undertaker. While heading to the cemetery, he finds um, Win Purton's dog, Doc, strung up on the front cemetery gate. We jump to the school bus driver, Charlie Rhodes. I love this dude, man. He's a piece all by himself. Charlie Rhodes learns he is kind of a dick to all the school kids. Jump to Stanley Street Elementary, and we meet school bully Richie Bowden looking for Mark Petrie, the new kid. Tries to bully Mark, but Mark beats the hell out of Richie. Not really, he kind of like trips him and has his arm behind his back, but he beats the hell out of him. And then we jump to the town the town dump, and we meet Dud Rogers. He is kind of a handicap. He's like a hunchback. I don't know what his proper. He's got a deformity. What's up, John? How's it going? Thanks for stopping by. Um, he is the lot custodian basically, but he kind of lives at the dot and does at the at the dump, and he kind of does like all jobs within town. He has a passion for shooting rats. We jump to Larry Crockett, the lot's realtor agent. 1 year before, we learn RT Striker, and I don't even know if that's how you say it right. I know that's how the audiobook, but the way it's spelled, it's like Straker. It's like Stracker. But I know in like all three interpretations that I saw, the two movies and the audiobook, it was like they say it's Striker. Um, so we meet RT Striker. He came to Larry and bought the Marston house and a small business building for $1. They talk of a partner from his partners from Europe. Um, Given to Larry ends up being a deal of a lifetime on three conditions. The first was the dollar, secrecy, and then a couple of odd services that he might need throughout his time being there. Um, Learn the partner's name is Barlow. Starts the store opens in exactly 1 week from this time, because when he's telling the story, this is like a year before when these people came in and bought the house and the shop. We jump to Bonnie Sawyer, wife to Reggie Sawyer, the lot mechanic, currently away at work, and Corey Bryant comes over for some cheatery. We meet Matthew Burke, 63-year-old English teacher in the lot. We jump to later that night at the Norton house and meet Susan's dad, Bill Norton. They have a nice dinner date. We meet Floyd Tibbetts, a credit manager who learns his uncle's dog dies. We meet the Glick family. Mate, damn, is it how do you say her name? Is it? Oh, okay, I got it. I got it. I got it. Marjorie and Tony Glick, and their two sons, Ralphie and Danny. Ralphie and Danny head over to Mark Petrie's house to look at his monster collection. They take a shortcut through the woods, telling scary stories along the way. They quickly feel a presence. We jump to the town gossip, Mabel Wirtz, who sees movement at the Marston house. At 11:59 p.m., a ritual takes place in the Harmony Hill Cemetery. Stryker gives Barlow one of the Glick toys. Oop, sorry about that. At the Glick toys is a sacrifice to start his work. Um, yeah, it's a lot. In like one chapter, there's like I think 15 little like or sub chapters or whatever. Um, all right, so now that we're here, Randy McDougal, this poor little baby. You talk about. I know when you read this scene, it caused some like dilemma, that kind of thing. I mean, it's hard to read as a parent. It's hard to go through that section and like feel any kind of sympathy for this person. I mean, you tell it.
Yeah. I mean, I'll say it to this: when I came to this part in the audio chapter, Michael tell you, I almost immediately messaged the group and was like, "Is this going to be in the whole book? Because if so, I got to jump off the train now." You know, um, it hit me a couple ways because the baby in this book is the same age as my daughter, so it kind of has that little extra kind of click to it. Um,
Yeah, touch of reality.
yeah, but I'll say this: as the story progresses, when we get to the ending with this baby, it to me, to be honest with you, I don't know if you want me to go too much into it. It kind of was like, oh, this is a happy ending for the baby.
It kind of is.
Yeah.
I mean, I want to say in a horrible way, it's better than where it starts, right?
Oh,
Like
exactly.
even though it's still a horrible thing as the way it turns out, it's still like, especially where we start out, I'd say it's definitely a better ending to our beginning with them. Um,
Yeah,
and
and I mean,
no,
sorry,
go
man.
ahead.
I was gonna say when we got done with this section, I asked you guys. I actually stopped listening to the book for about 1 or 2 days before I was like, all right, we go again. Um, I will
I
say,
don't, I
so
don't
good.
personally get real tense, or I don't. I'll get emotion as far as like books will get me to cry, they'll get me to laugh or smirk, those kind of things. But as far as scaring me or getting me to feel tense, as no. But this scene right here, it's just especially if you're a parent, I think it adds more weight to it. I want to imagine,
Yeah,
but like because for me it does, in that sense alone, just being a parent and witnessing this horrible scene from this and yes, she's young, she's new, but still, like, and it's not this. You do take it as this one scene, right? But you find out it's a continuing of scenes with
yeah,
Sandy. It's not that this has kind of been her answer, because especially the way, and I'm jumping ahead, but especially the way the father comes in, he's all like, "Oh, you hit Randy again," like this has been a repetitive thing with her. And of course, this takes place like early 70s, I want to say, because this was written in 75. It happens in 75, I think, and then or s- something like that. It's like, and I want to say it ends around 76.
I think
But
so.
and I want to say the world was a different day back then. I mean, one another year, and this book will be 50 years. It's crazy. Um, so yes, the world was different back then. I want to say I grew up in a world where spanking was kind of like the norm, but even this, I mean, and I'm one of those people that I don't look back at the spanking and see it as like, oh, my parents beat me or anything like that. So I mean, going through this scene, no, no, it's just a horrible kind of thing. Hey,
Hey,
Tina,
Tina.
thanks for stopping by. Another thing that I'd like to point on is okay, we touched base on like, he's spinning this tale of this small town in Maine, or is it? Yeah, it's in Maine.
Yeah,
But it's like the way he's driving in, it's nice. It's how you'd imagine a small little town. It's supposed to be pretty as far as the landscape. It looks like a small town as far as the houses are kind of like ruralized to spread out. And then like you're like a couple chapters deep, and he's like Sandy McDougal, like he comes in deep with this, and it's to lay on this thick, like the town looks pretty, it looks nice and everything, but there's something deep and dead behind, closed doors kind of thing.
precisely.
Mm. All right, so let's move away from that. Chapter 4 is not so bad. Danny Glick and the others, wondering what happened to their boy, which to me was crazy, right? Well, I guess that's that time too, because I can remember my parents were like, as long as you come home before sundown, they didn't, but like, okay, so it's the end of the night before his parents start questioning where they went, and they went out during daytime. Um, so wondering what happened to their boys, Mr. and Mrs. Glick, they start looking for Danny Glick, and they start looking for the boys, and all of a sudden Danny Glick appears in their backyard well after midnight. They explain he explains up until the point that he last saw Ralphie. Like that's all he remembers telling the ghost story, which he doesn't tell his parents that he had scared Ralphie and put him in a panic and stuff. Um, but basically, up until the point that Ralphie just vanishes, that's where his memory stops, and he just appeared, and he doesn't remember anything before that. 5 days back, and Danny Glick collapses and is hospitalized. They check for blood disorders. A search party starts the day after. Ben volunteers. Ben and Susan plan another date. Stryker calls Larry Crockett and needs a sideboard picked up from the wharf and then delivered to the Marston house in the basement. Royal Snow and Hank Peters pick up and deliver the sideboard. Hank possibly sees Ralphie's clothes in the basement. Hank admits to Larry, and Larry convinces him that he didn't see anything, paying him a little extra money. Parker Glipsy questions Ben Myers. Um, Parker lies about a book deal he once signed. I like that he uses deceased wife, and he actually, Ben actually already knows that it's his wife deceased. Um, Parker goes to a new shop and questions Stryker. Barlow is in New York. He learns it is Kurt Barlow. He asks about missing Yowans, which translates to little ones. Parker calls the FBI agent Hawthorne and looks into Ben Barlow and Stryker. 2 days after admitting to the hospital, Danny Glick dies. So a total of 7 days later, and Danny dies. What's up, brother Joe? Station. Thanks for stopping by. That part right there, it always like catches me off guard. Like, and I think that's a part of the book I love because I don't think they've done that too many times in other vampires where like, because he's trying to explain this in a world where people know vampires kind of thing. They're
Mhm.
aware of it, like the kids into monster movies and stuff like that. And then you start having people die and all they have are signs of being close to a vampire, and they're like, "Nah, that's not what it is." And I love how the doctors go through like, and they actually give you like in the book, it's like a straight document of like all the different tests that they put Danny through to find out, what was going on, kind of thing.
Yeah, no, I like that too. We're trying to. It's not like, oh, we had it. We immediately we have vampires. It's okay. Let's use a little bit of reasoning and deduction here.
This also kind of jumping ahead, but I also like the book's use of the can't theology, like especially with Susan and other people that run into this vampire thing, and their reality cannot allow this to be an answer to what's going on, kind of thing.
Right.
It incidentally is like the best explanation on what's going on with the town and why they never question most of these things. Like even later on in the book, after all these things, I think by that time, like 5 people have died and people are still like, "What? Stuff's going on? People are dying?
Pretty
What's up?
much.
What's up, Trev?" Thanks for
Cheers.
stopping by. Um, so let's move along. All right, chapter 5, Ben, part 2. Second date at the Norton's house. Ben learns Danny dies. The night on the walk back to Eve's, they stop at a park and talk about Ben's new book. They make love for the first time. After Ben talks about his new book related to the Marston house, we learn Ben has done research on Hubie Marston. Hubie was a hired hitman or a contract killer for the mob, eventually having to hide, doing some bad stuff, and then they made him go hide out. Builds the Marston house, all told by Manella Corey, Bertie Marston's sister. Um, This is a side note, and I don't know if you caught this because I do know you know the story kind of thing, but this part was a brief mention to The Shining. This person's sister knowing that her sister died, like the connection is that she had to touch kind of thing. Um, but that's kind of there's only like two real moments in this book that where he ties in other books. At this time, he had not wrote The Shining; he was still kind of writing The Shining, but you could say this is like a preliminary to The Shining kind of thing. Um, he does. I mean, he did. Thank God he doesn't go into great details. Um, thank God. Okay, so knowing being able to sleep, Ben heads to. He's not being able to sleep after they made love. And Ben heads to a bar, Dale's place. Ben drinks with Weasel and meets Matt Burke. Matt and Ben become instant friends. They set up a lecture for math class at school. Weasel gets drunk. Ben takes Weasel home. Chapter 6, The Law Part 2. September 28th, Danny is buried. Mike uh, Ryerson and Roy Snow dig his grave. Salem's Lot shows up for the funeral. Pretty much everybody's there except for Stryker and Barlow, I'd say. Um, what's up, Rich? Thanks for stopping by. They make a big deal of like going through this part of like one of my hated parts of the book is this funeral scene because it's like he's doing it from a third person. It's not the narrator that's doing it. It's like somebody that's sitting on a porch and they're watching everybody that's coming into the funeral and he's like naming every car and then every person that's in the car and it's like just sum it up, man. Like I mean everybody came to the funeral, it's not okay, let's see where was that by the way. Royal Snow seems sick. Met we meet Father Callahan, a local priest for the Catholic Church, gives the last rites after the funeral. Royal never shows up to dig in the grave. Mike Ryerson has to bury Danny alone. Thoughts of being watched while doing this, believe Danny is watching him while he digs. Um, Basically, he at one point he stops and he re-digs up Danny to check because he believes maybe they forgot to close his eyes. And sure enough, when he opens the coffin, his eyes are open. Roy McDougal comes home, learns Sandy beat baby Randy. Parkins head Parkins hears back from the FBI. All three names clear. Ben is not connected at all to Barlow and Stryker. At the dump, Dud Rogers is killing an abnormally amount of rats, which is a lot of rats normally, and now it's like thousands on top of the hundreds he's used to. And is greeted by Barlow, has a conversation, and is bitten by Barlow. We jump to Father Callahan at 53, and he's a drunk and slowly losing faith in what he believes the church is currently fighting, kind of thing. Not necessarily that he's lost faith in the church. It's more since he's lost faith in the current mission. Kind of. He's looking for the traditional fight against evil kind of thing. He misses that. Um, Chapter 7, we have Matt. Ben has the lecture at Matt's class. Later goes to dinner at Matt's house, talks about Ben's new book and history of the Marston house. Both of them know quite a bit. They make a plan to go to Marston's house on Friday and kind of do like a, hey, we're the neighborhood kind of thing. Um, Matt, Ben, and Susan to introduce the town. The next night, Matt goes to Dale's bar. This is a Thursday night and runs into Mike Ryerson. Mike is sick and goes into explanation of his sickness. Matt takes Mike home, his home, Matt's home, not to his house, for a controlled sleep, like he believes that's part of the deal. What's going on at Matt's house later that night? Matt spies two marks on Mike's neck. There's a lot of M's. During the night, Matt hears Mike invite someone in. Matt hears a child laughing and sucking noises. Um, I'm gonna stop right there before. This is actually one of my favorite parts in the book. This whole you know, that the setup from the bar all the way to the home. I want to say the only question is and he does explain it in the book why Matt would do this, but it is such a great setup. This dude's sick. He explains the time length he's been. There's no gaps in his story, kind of thing. Besides the part that he mentions, hey, I can't remember this, but I slept during this time. Um, we have Matt sitting here listening to it, not connecting the pieces that this guy, because at first he thinks he's on drugs, and then he's like, maybe he is sick, which is, and nowadays, bro, if somebody was this sick around me, I'd be like, well, I'll see you later, Mike.
Hmm.
I got to be over here, or I'll call you and we'll talk about it kind of thing. Um, what'd you think about this whole scene, the bar and then to the house?
Well, especially I took it as either Mike's a regular at the bar, um, the teacher's a regular as well, and it's just like, all right, let me take care of him, do a friendly thing. Yeah, what you were just saying too. You remember it's a different time and whatnot. I remember, this is from a little bit before I was born, but I remember when we first moved into my hometown, people used to have those helping hand signs up in their window. So I just kind of took it as, hey, he's a good guy trying to help his friend.
Around this time, hitchhikers were kind of still in the semi,
Yeah.
because I want to say we still had hitchhikers all the way up until 86, and then it started getting real scary. So it
Every now
definitely a different time.
every now and then I see one. I wouldn't pick him up, but every now and then I do see somebody hitchhiking.
I've been in the opposite where I've been that because I'm not even being the person that could use the ride. It's not so safe in that regard too, because you don't want
Oh
to get
yeah,
in somebody's car and I've had people pull over and be like, "Hey, you look like you're going far. You need a ride?" And depending on that person, or I'd be like, "No, I'm good." And then maybe I really need the ride. I still have like 10 miles to go or some shit, and I'll be like, "Nah, fuck it, man. You look scary."
yeah.
Um,
Go with your instincts.
No, but the whole way this is set up, with Matt being a teacher, him remembering Mike, so just the whole way King sets up this whole situation, even leading into Mike's house and everything. None of it's questionable on my reading stance, kind of thing.
No, no, I don't find it questionable either.
What's up, Steve? Thanks for stopping by. Happy
Mm-hmm.
Thanksgiving.
Yep. Happy Canadian Thanksgiving.
um, Yeah, but I really did enjoy this, and especially because this right here kind of, because there's a couple things that set up that traditional vampire trope, right? And he's definitely going for those things in this book. I mean, he's comparing, trying to do Bram Stoker's Dracula, and some of these hit it beat for beat, kind of thing. Um, no, but the way he's doing it in this modern, because this is almost like Nosferatu, but the reverse, it's and it's one of those first early scenes where I could see this in a black and white motif, and
Mm-hmm.
it all being silent. Matt coming into the room, checking on Mike, the way Mike looks, kind of thing. I don't know. I really did appreciate the scene. Um, let's see. So we get to part two, the Emperor of Ice Cream. I'm gonna say there's two parts of this book that make no sense to me, and this whole Emperor of Ice Cream thing. Yes, they give you the whole quote, and I know in the audiobook they read it and everything. I've read it, heard it, I mean, I'm not good with poetry and that kind of stuff, but this poem and what it's based on and what it's supposed to represent, it's supposed to be that everything equals death, that's basically the ultimate conclusion of that story. But that the Emperor of Ice Cream thing makes no sense to me. I don't get the usage of the poem in the story.
Yeah, I
I
couldn't. I couldn't get myself around it either.
they use it like it's I mean it is the title of this second chapter in the book, and then not only that, but there's like I want to say three times that they kind of bring up in story because there's like a time when Matt talks about the poem, and then there's like a later time when like Ben says it in like kind of a like damn moment, you know. I don't know, it's really weird.
Mhm.
Um, so we get to chapter 8, which has been subchapter subchapter 3 at 4 a.m. Friday. Uh, Friday morning, Ben is awakened by Eve from a phone call from Matt. Needs Ben to come over ASAP and asking for him to bring a crucifix. On the drive over to Matt's, Ben puts on the cross and instantly feels better. Matt explains he thinks Mike is dead. They both check, windows open. It was supposedly closed when Matt was in the room before. Mike appears to be dead. One drop of blood on the bed next to him, and no bite marks now. Ben and Matt discuss what to do, decide to do an experiment, use the scientific method before jumping to conclusions. They decide to call Parkins and MD James Cody, which is Matt's doctor, and tell him Mike is sick. They basically kind of like let the machine take over, is the way the book calls it. Um, Mike declared dead the second the medical advisor and the cop gets there. They're like, "Yep, he did." Um, Parkins admits checking in on Ben with four dead. Parkins mentions fatigue and the job. Uh, Basically, he's running out of steam as a cop, kind of thing. Now that there's at this point, it's the dog, and then there's three. They've kind of already said that the boy's dead, and then his brother, and then now, Mike goes back to sleep, wakes up at 4 p.m. and heads out to tell. No, 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 I wrote that wrong. That's Matt. Matt goes back to sleep, wakes up at 4 p.m. and heads out to tell Susan. And Floyd Tibbetts shows up and knocks out Ben. Um, this is one of the better parts in the story. What's up, Phil? Is this whole background thing with Susan and Floyd Tibbetts? Um, it's so subtle at first, and I don't like. I think the first time I read it, I don't think I recognized it. I kind of forget until I get there that that's in there, because it starts out with just Ben meeting Susan, them falling in love. It's Floyd is kind of like briefly mentioned in the background, that she did date him. She stopped dating him. That was kind of the end of it. What's up, Cash and Dad? Thanks for stopping by. Um, but this part, when he shows up and knocks Ben, it comes out of like totally left field, But I mean, Ben just got done, like, he's about to like, I think he's on his way to go over to like Matt, check with him because of this whole thing that happened, or he just got done with it. That's what it is. He just got done with it. He goes home, goes to sleep, and when he wakes up, he's heading over to tell Susan all this crap, and then Floyd shows up, and Floyd just there's like some conversation, but it's more like just the accusational, like, you stole my girl, and he just starts beating him, and he lands a lucky punch that where Ben falls backwards and knocks his head. What'd you think about the whole Floyd Tippett thing, especially in his appearance in this scene?
Yeah, I mean, the appearance definitely odd, and it was a detail that sadly was missing from both versions of the films. I guess you could say.
But in both
Oh,
versions of the film, Floyd's character was so odd because in the book he's a
oh yeah,
credit manager. He's basically like like a loan bank person. I mean, he's somebody that sits in an office. Like, even the way he's explained, like his appearance and everything. He's tall and lanky. He's just got like kind of normal black hair. He's not like a big dude. Like, I think in one interpretation he's supposed to be a cop, and another interpretation he was like a cable man or something like that. I can't. Yeah, I don't know.
just the whole circumstance because I mean, look, we're about halfway into the story, and we just saw our first vampire. Even really, not really quite yet. This his appearance helps build into this mystery. Okay, what's going on here? And it's something that I think both filmmakers missed completely.
Because, and you just briefly mentioned this, but this is a big part of the book that's already gone through. We're in the second chapter of this, like, it's a pretty decent sized book. And we get to, like, I mean, there's like I want to say 200 pages of King explaining this town, starting up Ben and Susan's love kind of stuff, and none of this stuff has really gone on besides the boys gone missing. And at this point, that could be anything, and especially with the striker doing the ceremony. I don't know if I caught that first or second time. I think the movie actually helped me catch that time because I was like, I don't remember this in the book. And then when I was going back dissecting it, I was like, oh crap, it was here. It was kind of like in the wind type of moment when like right after he captured him, it was like Stryker went instantly over to the cemetery and he was like, Lord, I have a sacrifice for you.
Hmm.
But like no, there's a couple parts like this that are like they're one or two sentences real quick and you just miss them kind of thing.
Yeah,
Um,
I missed it completely until you just said it. So
I,
yeah,
I'll
when I
tell
saw the movie, I was like, oh, they just added that. But
me too.
there's still a
Like,
key difference. Yeah.
no, there's a big key difference, especially when related to Barlow. But we're gonna get there.
Mhm.
All right, so let's move along. So
Mike,
we
I'll
get
be
to
right back. I'm going to jump for 1 second.
yeah, you're good. So we move along to chapter 9, Susan, subchapter 2. Susan comes home at 3 p.m. This is an hour before because Floyd attacked Ben at 4. So we jump back an hour. So she comes home and she has a conversation with her mom explaining that Mike died. They fight due to Ann Norton using tabloid news. Base, Ann Norton basically throws all this tabloid news like related to Ben, to against Susan and stuff. And Susan at this point kind of has already put together the pieces and knows the story because it's all related to this motorcycle accident when Ben was earlier and he had a wife. They were riding a motorcycle and he wasn't drunk and he ends up crashing into somebody that pulled out in front of him too quickly and he just didn't have time to react. There was like a breathalyzer involved and this other stuff, but it was basically tabloid news that made it look like this. I want to say it looks like Sydney Cat. What's up, Sydney Cat? Or it might just be Cat. Thanks for stopping by. We're gonna get to there, Steve. That's gonna be a bit at the end, kind of thing. Maybe more near the last hour. Um, all right. So they fight due to the tabloid news. Susan decides to move out the next Tuesday. Eva Miller calls and explains Floyd put Ben in the hospital. Susan goes and sees Ben in the hospital. Ben tells Susan to go to Matt and Father Callahan. Father is Floyd is locked up due to the whole entanglement with Ben. Susan goes to Matt and explains Ben is in the ER. Matt tells Susan everything up to date that they know. While trying to convince Susan, Matt hears something upstairs. So currently, this is all taking place at Matt's house because Ben's in the hospital. Susan goes over to Matt and she's explaining everything up to date, about Mike Ryerson dying, them taking away Mike Ryerson, that kind of thing. Um, so basically, at this point, Matt is trying to convince someone that just, I mean, how do you convince somebody that vampires are real? Like, even though he had the encounter and he saw what he saw, like, he brought home somebody that seemed like he was, you know, very fatigued. He had two marks on his neck. And, eventually, because he invited this guy in, eventually this guy was allowed to invite another vampire in the middle of the night, this thing opens his window and comes in and sucks the remaining blood from this guy and the guy dies. So he's trying to convince Susan all this happened, but of course Susan's sitting there like, yeah, that sounds like a great story. Um, so at this point, they both kind of start hearing stuff upstairs because they're at Matt's house. He's explaining to Susan, but nobody else is supposed to be there. So they do start, you know, um, hearing something upstairs. And thanks for stopping by, Carmen. Um, have a good night. So Matt goes upstairs and investigates, and he is greeted by vampire Mike Ryson. Using the crucifix, Matt revokes Mike's invitation. Mike is forced out of the house. Matt calls for Susan to contact Cody Jimmy, which is the doctor, and that he is having a heart attack. She calls Dr. Cody. goes back upstairs and finds Mike ring and believes in everything at this point because now she's found proof and that ring wasn't there before. We go to chapter 10, the lot. And to clarify at this point, now Ben and Matt are both in the hospital. Matt just having his heart attack after the whole vampire thing. So, chapter 10, the lot subchapter 3, the narrator explains how a small town can go bad and incite evil into that town, welcoming it. Danny Glick takes and turns baby Randy McDougal into a vampire. Sandy McDougal is awoken to a very dead Randy the next day. So basically, he's taken, the baby is drained, and then they put the baby back. So Sandy wakes up to a very dead um, baby. It's another horrifying scene because she's trying to get baby Randy to come back, show some signs of life. She's trying to stick food in his mouth. Oh, it's horrible. Um, Marjorie tells Tony Glick that she has been having dreams of Danny coming to her as a baby, and she breastfeeds him. Uh, uh, Marjorie, in mourning, is displaying major signs of fatigue. Susan goes to see Ben and explains about Matt, talks about Susan's use of can't towards belief, talks about Floyd and his appearance during the attack. In jail, Floyd is found dead. Uh, Two guys go out to a now closed dump. No dead Dud Rogers and no rats. Ben goes and visits Matt. He puts his crosses on while he's sleeping, and his cross is like hanging up in a closet or whatever. Corey Bryant and Bonnie Sawyer are caught by Reggie Sawyer. Reggie puts a shotgun in his mouth and fakes the shotgun going off. Corey faints while Corey was asleep. Bonnie is beat. Basically, her whole body except for her face is beat. Um, but basically, Corey is told to leave Salem's Lot. Corey is leaving, and Barlow stops him and has a conversation. And at the end of that, he is turned. Saturday night, Susan calls Ben, tells him that Floyd died and baby Randy died. Sandy McDougal is taken away, like temporarily in restraints. Um, Plans to meet the next day to talk to Matt and Cody. Floyd and Randy's body are missing from the morgue. Danny goes to Mark. This is specifically the one and only Dark Tower reference. Did you catch the? Now I'm going to tell you what the reference is, but did you catch any Dark Tower reference in the whole book?
It wasn't 19, was it? I'm trying to think.
Nope, it's not number related. It's a saying.
I didn't catch it now.
So this happened. Well, I want to say it happens on in my book, and I'm reading the, normal side. On page 445, we have the rain in Spain is playing along. Um, this is a line that Roland uses later on while talking. He's walking through the desert, and Roland uses this right before he is about to pass out. He says he got it from his mother. It's one of the rhymes that she used, and he didn't understand what a plane was or what Spain was, blah blah blah. But it's also used here by our dude Mark Petrie to keep Danny Glick away. Danny Glick is in the process of hypnotizing our dude Mark because he comes at him at the middle of the night. He's scratching on his window and he's like, "Hey, Mark, let me in." And he's literally hypnotizing him. And to unhypnotize himself, he uses this along the plane in Spain. It was raining, whatever that whole. I can actually pull it up.
So
But that is, as far as I know, that's the one and only like reference. Of
interesting.
course, this is like 7 years before he released the Dark Tower kind of thing.
So
And
you
hey,
think
Christina, thanks for
you,
stopping by.
you think Mark could have been a good gunslinger at some point?
Well, as we get to the end of the book, I think him and Ben both could have been fantastic gunslingers, and we're gonna get there. But they show many qualities, right? Throughout the end of this book. All right, so let's move along. So basically, in this scene, Danny is, He's being almost hypnotized. Mark is almost being hypnotized by Danny Glick at his window. Eventually, he grabs a plastic cross because he has all these like monster models in the background. He loves monsters and the monster movies, and he actually has like they used to have model kits back in the 70s and 80s that you could buy and you can make your own like you know diorama of those scenes. And he grabs a plastic glow in the dark cross and he invites Danny in. Danny comes in and he pulls the cross and smashes it to Danny's cheek. It literally burns a stamp of the cross, into Danny's cheek. And as he pulls it away, the glow in the dark cross actually lights. It emits a light after it touches the vampire. Um, and basically, at this point, Danny flees. He leaves the house, kind of thing. I will there's a couple things that like if you're just reading this real fast you don't realize, but in this world these vampires do have rules, and we do find out one of those rules is being you have to be invited in. It's kind of like a main current agglomerator or over like and in this book a lot of these vampires do, they suffer from sunlight, just what we witnessed. They suffer from religious, items, that kind of thing. um so Danny did forget one thing in this moment. He did give the invitation and invite a vampire into his house, but he forgot to revoke the invitation as the vampire left, and it does play a big part into later on. Um, so we get to chapter 11, Ben, and this is subchapter 3. Ben, Susan, and Matt have their meeting on Sunday. They catch up, agree to move forward with the scientific method. Matt plans to research. Ben and Susan, now that he's in the hospital, he's basically like, well, I'll be the reading guy. Um, Ben and Susan ask Cody to exhume Danny Glick for proof. Matt tells Ben to go to Father Callahan for holy water and a wafer, the and entombment of God. Um, Cody goes to see Ben later that night. Cody tells of the missing body. Cody agrees to exhume Danny, claiming to look for infectious encephalitis. Um, it gives the weirdest description of a decomposed body. I'm going to stop us right here because I highlighted this for a reason. Um, I have a lot of medical background, right? And I specifically worked in a morgue, and this is something that this is one of those moments when you come across somebody, they mention something, and you're like, yeah, you have very limited like experience in this. So this doctor tells these people that they're going to find some strange things when they open this coffin. At this point, Danny Glick has been supposedly buried for a week. And he mentions that the fingernails would be like extremely long and the hair would be really long. And they'd be like, no, people, no, 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 no. In a week's time, that would not be the case. Now, in months, yes, 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 you would find, in a couple weeks, your nails grow pretty long. Months, they grow, and then they keep growing. That's the true thing. But like and it's like a big paragraph of this book where he goes into detail about like, how after a week, they were about to find these long fingernails on this kid. And I was like, no, 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 no. Not after a week. I mean, they'd be a little longer. But okay, okay. Um, so explain Danny's body is the only that they know where it is. All the other bodies have disappeared. We got the baby, even the dog at this point was supposedly buried and then redug up, and it is now they disappeared. Um, no, but all the bodies are gone. So, explain Danny's body is the only one. And Cody goes to the Glicks and, asking for permission to exhume the body. Learns Mrs. Glick is dead, died that morning. Tony is in shock, and he actually is in the hospital. They're having a look at him, mentally. Um, Ben and Jimmy Cody go to see Mrs. Glick's body. Now that they have a fresh body, they decide to abandon Danny because they were going to have to dig him up, take him out of the coffin, take him back to a morgue. So they're like, hey, a body's in the morgue. Let's go check that. Um, so Ben starts to connect the dots. Susan heads to the Marston house alone, grabs a plastic fence for a stake, buys a cross, She makes it to the house and is found by somebody. Ben and Jimmy wait at the morgue while this experiment is a go. Ben blesses a cross for Jimmy. The cross starts to glow. Marjorie Glick rises at the same moment. As an attempt to subdue her, Jimmy is bitten. Ben uses the cross and Marjorie flees, like literally turns into smoke and goes to the wall. Um, Jimmy cleans and heals the wound. No infection. Jimmy, they literally have to use the cross, like try to see if it highlights kind of thing to make sure he hasn't been affected. Um, Jimmy punches Ben after all this has been said and done. And they basically use it to cover up their story because now there's no body and they're going to have to talk to um, the county sheriff, Homer McGlasky, and the EMD that actually like granted them access to do this, which was like a family friend of Jimmy Cody. He had to like pull a favor kind of thing. Um, this whole scene right here was another one of those moments like of a young writer, Stephen King, because no cop in their right mind or the morgue practitioner would have been like, so y'all were sitting here and a guy ran in here and beat y'all up and just stole the body. And y'all try to like grab the body, and he just turned around and bit one of y'all and took the body and ran. Like, it's the strangest. Like they could have come up with like so many different better ways. Like, man, we fell asleep and we woke up and the body was just gone. I don't know. Um, so we move along. We move along. We're getting and then this is one of the Emperor of Ice Cream and the last chapter. The Emperor of Ice Cream has a massive like when we get to all right. So chapter 12, we get to Mark. Mark also, yeah, very believable. Very. That's what I'm saying. Very. So Mark also heading to the Marston house, equipped with stakes and a gun, finds Susan and they team up. You talk about two different ways to approach this house, right? Susan's like, you know what? My boyfriend's not here, even though he wants to go to this house and go check to see if this guy's a vampire. And like, I'm starting to believe in vampires. I'm just gonna grab this like plastic fence and use it as a stake, and I'm just gonna do this thing. And this little boy here, not only does he has like baseball bats that have been made into stakes, he's got a gun. He's like, screw that. Like he's like, I mean, he's anticipating the familiar, and I mean, he's thought some things through. Um, so back in the last chapter, when she was found, that was actually Mark finding her because she was so clumsily like making her way to the house. Mark is like, what is this lady doing? Um, it's actually one of my favorite scenes. Like, I have two favorite scenes, and this scene right here, just watching Mark's like reaction to Susan, like making it up to this house, like it's really funny, and I love the way he does it because there's a horrible scene that comes right up. All right, so let's see where was I? Where was All right, so they team up. Mark explains about Danny, and they break into a window on the side of the house. Creeping around, they find the cellar door. As they go inside, Stryker appears behind them, knocking Mark out instantly and takes Susan. Mark wakes up, is told Susan has been taken to the master. Mark is tied up and escapes with the willpower of Houdini. Himself grabbing a metal leg from a bed. He waits for Stryker to come back, which doesn't take too long. Stryker comes back, and Mark hits his head twice. Stryker goes down. Mark goes back for Susan, but Barlow has Susan, and Mark flees, runs home. Vampire Susan comes to Mark in the middle of the night, plans to go to Ben as well. Um, our very last chapter of this thing is chapter 13, Father Callahan. Father goes to see Matt in the hospital. Father Callahan needs a little more convincing, but agrees to be a part of the whole experiment kind of thing. Um, yeah, no joke. And that's gonna be like one of my questions, like that goes into this. But I want to say it was like an early form of Jake, like um, And I want to say that that whole like, could these two be gunslingers? Like this kid, most definitely. Like, not only was he so easily convinced on, and not just convinced because he knew what was going on, but the whole like how prepared, like out of everybody, he's the only one. Like they put great thought into all this, but then they're not so prepared. This kid, he's like, I mean, he has all this knowledge, but then he goes into it a little more prepared than they do. Um, Before I move on, because this next part is big. Is there anything you want to throw down?
Um, no, I mean, I think it's this is the point where in the book where it starts to really speed up,
Yes, it
and
does. And there's a
and
lot that
it's
goes down.
yeah, a lot is kind of there as far as hey, we're definitely not dealing with some kind of disease now.
Nah, because at this point, pretty much everybody in the book that they run into is like, hey, vampires, or a little convincing a vampire. I think the only, even at one point when we get to Parker Calypso and he's like, oh, vampires? Uh huh. Yeah, okay. I know what you're talking about. Hides in the long, hey, hides in the long grass. I actually prefer the new Salem's lot to the old Salem's lot. We're gonna get there. We're gonna get there. Well, I know both of us have comments on both. We
Oh
haven't
yeah,
gotten. We're still doing the book right now. We'll get there. We'll get there. Maybe in like 20 more minutes, something like that. Um. All right. So part three, the deserted village, chapter 14, the lot, subchapter 4. Larry Crockett and family turned. Mention of others. Okay. Larry Crockett and family are turned. Mention of others turned. Weasel is missing. Mark goes to Ben. Waits. The Nortons look for Susan. Susan and Barlow feast throughout town. Next day, Ben and Mark meet. Explains Susan is a vampire and Stryker is dead. They have they head to the Marston house, find Susan's car and a police gun for some reason. They head back and meet with Matt and Jimmy. Discuss what Matt has learned. Ben is told that she must slay Susan. Most traditional, like vampire deterrents that they discuss, like garlic and those kind of things. They do bring up white roses, and I have this highlighted. This was brand new for me. I can't ever remember, and I've seen a lot of. I love vampires.
same.
I watched like, and I don't think I've ever heard of any other vampire thing, even related to like roses or white roses. Maybe like roses as far as like pictures that they'll use on like movie covers, but like I've never heard of it used as a deterrent. So I thought this was kind of interesting. Um, Eva Miller investigates a foul smell in her basement. Following instructions from Matt, Ben gives father his confessional and completes it with acts of contrition. Ben, Mark, father, and Jimmy head out to find white roses. They're all sold out throughout all over town. Barlow is ahead of them, multiple steps ahead. They go to the Marston house. Father, blesses the house, which blows the front door clean off. I love the scene. I mean, he just goes up to it and he's all like, "All demons, be out of this house!" And he puts the cross on the door, and not only is it a bust like windows and no, but from hence on, from this point in the book, the Marston house is clean. Like there ain't no more demons in there. There ain't no more ghosts. The evil presence is kind of gone, kind of thing. Um, Bill's saying. My teachers looked at me funny when I was reading this in the seventh grade when I bet they did. Yeah, and Steve White's like, be gone. Yeah, you're right. The power of Christ compels you. All right, so where were they?
In the
They find,
house.
yeah, they find Stryker dead. He's basically upside down and mutilated. Barlow has fled, but leaves a note. All are addressed in this note. All that have like taken up any kind of arms at this point against Stryker, and he doesn't just like mention their name. He goes into their like family and this and that. And he threatens all of them, but basically kind of like tunes into Mark because Mark did something that that no other person has done, and he took out his familiar. So Mark has granted special. Like he actually says that he's going to rape, like change him, turn him, and then kill his parents, kind of thing. And he mentions the rape part a couple times. Um, roses. The sin keeps vampires at bay. The thorns keep them in their graves, supposedly. It's interesting.
Yeah, I was trying to find out if that came from a movie or a book or something, but I'm not finding anything myself.
I want to
Just
say like in
general lore.
Castlevania, like they do have like rose whips and stuff like that. So I want to say it's there has to be somewhere. I'm gonna have to go deeper into that, but I briefly looking at it, I couldn't really find anything. Um, thanks, Tina. All right, so he blows the door off, right? Um, trying to find out where there's a lot written. I lost my place. All right, but Father blesses the house, blows the front door clean off. They find Stryker dead, mutilated upside down. Barlow leaves the note. Um, they find Susan in the cellar, and they're still in the house. They find this note. Um, and basically he leaves Susan there for Ben, knowing that they're gonna have to kill Susan, and he's all like, haha, you want a taste of trying to kill me, then try and kill your lover who I just changed kind of thing. Um it's stated in the note that Ben has to do it because he's kind of like the group leader kind of thing, and even the group kind of agrees that since Ben had like the lover, but you know that he has to do it. So Um, s- basically, he does. He uses a hammer and a stake. The hammer kind of like mysteriously appears in his hand. Um, it, it's not something that they took, and the book kind of states that it does just appear there. Um, after that, they put Susan in Barlow's coffin. And they throw her into the Royal River, and the coffin is lined with rocks, and she sinks to the bottom. Um, this is to me, this was like the hardest scene to read in the book. I really did like the romance between Ben and Susan, and like getting to this point and Ben having to kill Susan. This was a tough scene. You're talking about like damn. And not only that, the way it's presented as like they go into this house, like with this big gusto, like, Callahan blessing the house and them finding Stryker the way he was, and then reading the note, and they're like, yeah, Susan's right down there, and you just got to go stake her. Like, man, it was tough. To me, this was the tensest scene. Just the emotion that goes into Ben, like him having to like just walk up to her, and her being asleep kind of thing. Man, and this tough. It's tough. Um, all right, let's see before I lost my place again.
Every
So
rose has its thorn.
right, thanks for the joke. Kiss from the rose on the grave. All right, so they catch up with Matt. Father goes and to drop off Mark. During the conversation, they realize Barlow is going after Mark and his parents first. Barlow does show up. He kind of kills the phone, kills the lights, and then all of a sudden he's like a shadow in the kitchen and the Petrie home. He instantly kills Mark's parents, like literally grabbing their heads and smashing them together at this like Spider-Man-ish force. Um, Barlow Mark is basically captured at that point, and Father basically only has his cross as his only defense. His cross does work at first; it lights up. Barlow allows Mark to leave during this part because Barlow is asking Callahan to drop the cross and basically come at him at a man. Um, Father basically does kind of drop the cross for a second. Mark ends up like running away, kind of. He doesn't run away, and then he does run away. Um, and Callahan picks up the curse again. You know, uh, Barlow kind of makes fun of him for doing it, kind of thing. And at this point, when he brings back up the curse, that's when the cross loses like all its kind of power. Barlow walks over, snaps the cross in two, and then basically grabs Callahan and tells him that he's not going to kill him. He's basically going to, taint him, and he makes him drink his own blood kind of thing. Um, Let me see. So we got Ann Norton turned, and basically at this point, Susan's mom is also turned. She is sent to Matt Burke's room at the hospital with a gun to assassinate him. She is stopped actually by like a random person, an orderly that just kind of happily. I mean, she walks into the hospital pretty crazily, like waving a gun. Um, so Mark and Ben make it back to Matt's, and that's father leaves town. Now Mark, now it okay. Father leaves town now that he's Mark. He hops on a bus to New York, trying to figure out where Barlow is. Mark remembers seeing blue chalk on his fingers after he had like grabbed him or whatever. They end up sleeping for the night over all being overwhelmed. Charlie Rhodes, the bus driver, is killed in his bus by his own kids. Ann Norton like officially dies now because she kind of like already dies. And no, but now she like dies. Eva Miller flips through reality and dreams. She's basically like kind of being turned and doesn't realize she's being turned. And it's this weird like slow kind of love scene, weird scene with Weasel where sometimes she's in reality and then other times she's dreaming, but basically she's being drained. Um, let's see. Barlow mentions the attic at this point and fixing stairs. This is a major cliffhanger to what's coming. I did not catch this the first two times, and it relates to one of my favorite scenes in the book. Um,
Same.
but basically, Barlow tells her to go check the attic and to tells her to go fix these stairs, that they'll be having company soon. I did not catch that the first couple times through. Um, Eva and Weasel go off to do so. Parkins mentions leaving town. Basically, he's kind of noticed that some strange stuff is going on, and he's all like, you know what? I'm just a little bitty deputy. I'm gonna get my peeps, and we're getting the hell out of here. They even kind of mentioned, hey, we know where the main vampire is. He's right over there. Let's go get him. And Parkins is like, you know what? It's all you. I'm out of here. He's basically already packed up at this point. Um, which is kind of like one of the small saving graces in this. Like, I mean, besides the heroes of the story, you actually have some people with some sense that are like, I don't have all the information going on, but based on what I can see, I'm getting the f out of here. Um, Bill Norton heads to the hospital. Corey Bryant kills Reggie Sawyer. Reggie Sawyer. Callahan gets some road drinks for the bus trip. Daylight comes, and Mark and Ben head to school. Um, it's basically like the school that they thought Barlow was at. But they stop at Mark's house for steaks. They decide to stop at Barlow's shop before that. Okay, so they head to Mark's house to make steaks. Before on the way there, they're passing Barlow's store, and they're like, "Wait a minute, let's check Barlow's store." And so they stop before they start making steaks, and they're like, "Let's go check Barlow's store." And incidentally, they don't find Barlow there, but they do find Mike Ryerson hiding out there, and they leave him there. They mark like the doors saying they checked it, kind of thing. Um, they head to Mark's house and cover Mark's parents using like uh, sofa covers, which back in the day they were like clear plastic, which is horrible. They just basically like put Ziploc bags over his parents. Um,
As an Italian, I could tell you that they still have them.
yeah. So Ben stays to make steaks while Jimmy and Mark plan to go out. So at this point, we got Matt who's basically doing the research. We got Mark that's got to make like 300 steaks because that many people, or close to that many people, are assumed to have changed. And then Jimmy and Mark head off. Um,
Just in case people, he means steaks is in a stabby kind, not the
yeah, like
eating kind.
not steaks. He's not doing a barbecue. No,
Yeah.
not that kind of barbecue. So Jimmy and Mark head to the McDougal's. It's one of the easiest places that they know like a person might be, kind of thing. Um, and they do find the McDougalls, and this is something we mentioned earlier. I think this is one of the happier notes in the book. Like we do meet the McDougal family, which was um, mom, dad, and their little baby, and incidentally, they find them all tucked away sleeping together, and it's kind of like this creepy, scary, but nice, like surreal family moment kind of thing. I don't know. Is
Yeah,
this the scene you were talking about? There was like
I yeah. To be honest, it almost because the way they described it, if you remember, I think they see the legs,
they're
and he
just their little
says,
feet.
yeah, he says he sees the baby feet, and I was like, ah,
Yeah,
like
and
to me, it was like, yeah, hey, the baby, this is a good move for the baby to become a vampire.
yeah, because he probably, I mean, oh, well, no, I'm not gonna say anything. Well, because I don't think they actually do the McDougalls. Like they do kind of go after a bunch of vampires, but I don't think the McDougalls are actually mentioned.
Right? They don't
Um,
bring the McDougalls back yet. The only
yeah,
thought though
so
I did have about them though post book, because without saying the ending, this book does a very good job of adhering to all the norms and everything that we know about vampires that we've seen in other books and other movies, except for one thing, and that one thing makes it frightening. That being said, the first thing I thought of afterwards was, if you remember Interview with the Vampire, when Kirsten Dunst gets turned. I never read the book. I'm talking about the movie. Sorry. Um, I think like, hey, she's going
it's
to
the
be like
same.
13 the rest of her life.
It's the same because I have
So
it. I love that series.
yeah,
But yeah, and that okay. So you have to imagine that poor Randy McDougal is stuck at that age forever.
yeah.
But I mean, in that regard, at that age, like that you would only be able to return like short-term memories. So I mean, all he'd be about is like feeding and eating and sleeping and mommy and daddy.
See,
Those
though,
kind of things.
here's the thing. Now maybe I'm looking
Hey,
too much
Bethany.
into this. Um, do
Oh, this is interesting.
yeah, my daughter again being about the same age, she's starting to teeth. She doesn't have all her teeth yet.
Mhm.
So do vampire babies just get their fangs? If
I, would-
not, that's a problem.
I would say yes, because humans get the fangs regardless, like, because they don't naturally have because in this, like in the movies, it's shown different, but in the books, they do have the traditional, like, long canines that come out over here, the
Yeah,
gaps are spaced out. Um, so whenever they do turn into the vampire, they do gain that. So I want to believe it's like a magical thing that they just gain along with the traits and disabilities that vampires have, kind of thing. You just touched base on it. I want to. It's one of the things I do appreciate about this vampire story because not only it's one of the things that I hate about monster stories that involve stuff like zombies or like for instance, The Walking Dead would be an example. We're talking about a world where that term zombie doesn't exist, so they don't use zombies. They use walkers and other things. Like it's a foreign concept, The Walking Dead. In this book, it's not a foreign concept. Vampires, they know that they have, books and vampires, So I appreciate their vampires having most of the common, if not some of the more extraordinary, like turning into smoke and the animal traits, because Barlow at one point does mention, he is friends to bats, wolves, rats,
hmm
and he specifically detests dogs. Like,
yeah,
it's in the blood. Uh, no, but
gross.
I really do appreciate those things, and they're not used in like these super elaborate ways because he could have used the smoke gimmicks and really like gimmicky ways, and I kind of appreciated it. We didn't get a lot of that kind of thing.
Yeah,
All right, around find out where I was.
McDougal's.
Mhm. All right, so they do find all three McDougalls, and they pull out the father testing the sunlight theory into vampires, and it in this case it does turn out to be true. Um, Mr. McDougal kind of fries for a little bit, and his skin deteriorates, his eyes kind of get sunken in. There's some steam that kind of pops out. What's that, bitch? Ah?" Um, And before he knows it, he kind of scurries back to his little dark place and instantly goes back to sleep, which I thought was interesting, because it could have been one of those cases. Because vampires are always depicted either or. It's like once you wake them up, they're up. In this case, it's like, during during that time that they're asleep, like, I mean, this dude fried. And he just instantly like goes back to sleep. I mean, he literally like at one point while he was frying, he touches like I want to say he touches Mark, and literally at that point, the vampire could have grabbed him and kind of tried to kill him, and he's so out of it that he's still like asleep, kind of thing. I
To
thought
be
that
fair, I'm
was
the
kind of
same way.
yeah, me too. Uh, some people are not though. All right, so McDougal's fries a little, so they do test out that there. Remember, we're still doing, the scientific method kind of. Um, They marked 2 spots total. It's basically they went to that trailer and they go to a trailer that's nearby that they figure the McDougalls would have went after first, which turns out to be true. Um, Jimmy dreams and realizes the chalk was from pool cues. Pool cues. They had been thinking the chalk they found on Barlow's fingers were related to schools or stuff that generally had chalk. The issue was the blue chalk, and the other issue was most of these places were either well lit, windowed areas or just well public used areas like schools and stuff like that. Um, but basically, he figures out that you know, Jimmy basically figures out that's where that like a hint to where Barlow's hiding. Sadly, at this point, Matt Berg dies of his second ongoing heart attack. He gets put in the hospital with a heart attack, and this one's like a heavier. Um, and incidentally, when he dies, he's talking about another town that ends up disappearing, kind of thing, and how that could happen. Mark and Jimmy discover Barlow is in Eva Miller's. Uh, Jimmy and Mark head to Eva's. Ill equipped, Mark and Jimmy head into Eva's without Ben, realizing one fall quickly that the house is pitch black. Jimmy finds the cellar door and falls to his death. Uh, okay, this people is my favorite scene in the book. That like, and I hate that it's kind of in one movie and it's not another movie because
Mm.
the use of the scene right here and the setup of the scene is so sly on a writer level, but then as a villain level that and I'll get to it later, but I mean, but this scene when it happens, it's so like left field because they're in the dark that Jimmy is like they're literally at this point frantically looking for a flashlight, candles. Jimmy tells Mark to go look for a flashlight, and literally he finds a flashlight. And the instant he does, Jimmy, for some reason, opens a door, and the door leads out to a bottom, like a very like low drop, and it had he ends up dying. And we'll find out why in a little bit, but this whole scene, the setup and everything, and then
Oh
finding
yeah.
those little cues that I found earlier about like Barlow telling what's her face and, to set up all this, um, which is great. Okay, so um, it sucks for Jimmy, and Jimmy was such a cool character too. Because I mean, because there's so many good characters in this book, and I mean, his death is like not only so quick but so tragic, but it's like such a high point for the villains kind of thing. Um, so let's see. All right. Falls to his death. Barlow taking out the stairs and equipping the floor with stakes made out of knives that were brought out of the kitchen. There's also moments when they're in the kitchen and they're looking around for the flashlights when Jimmy himself realizes that all the knives are missing and it should have been a cue to something was going on. I didn't even put that in here because I don't even think that's a cue anybody would notice. Like, first off, where the kitchen knives were or that the kitchen knives were missing. I think most people would just be looking for flashlights and stuff. Um, so find Mark drives to Ben after that. He basically like after Jimmy dies, he gets in Jimmy's car and he drives off. And of course, remember Jimmy is a young kid; he's never driven before. So Ben basically finds him along the way and like collars him down. A little. This is after 4 p.m. And again, to remind people, 7 p.m. is when the sun goes down. Um, they explain everything that happened. Ben and Mark learn of Matt's death, that that he died in the hospital. Ben goes to Parkins, explains everything to Parkins. Parkins does not care, says he's leaving. I kind of mentioned that before. Ben and Mark grab some holy water from Father Callahan's church. There's a brief little scene here with like Callahan's helper or whatever. It's kind of it's very brief. But it's basically the book's way of telling us, yep, Callahan's done. He's gone. Um, let's see. They do get the holy water. They go back to Eve's. They recover Jimmy's body in the cellar. They find a secret door behind a huge well stretcher. Finding an axe, Ben coats it in holy water and breaks open the door. Inside, they find about 10 vampires, including Eva and Weasel, and Barlow's coffin. They grab it, bring it out into the cellar, desperately rushing daylight. They open the coffin, and an asleep Barlow psychically attacks Mark, basically making Mark trying to shoot himself, and then after he can't shoot himself, he tries to shoot Mark, kind of thing. And the only way out of this is Mark kind of has to beat the hell out of, Ben has to beat the hell out of Mark, and eventually he does, like he hits him twice, and then eventually kind of puts Mark into this catatonic state where he's just calling for his mama, kind of thing. Um, let me see. Ben is forced to stop and grab him. At this time, Ben goes back. He grabs a stake and a hammer. At this point, Barlow is still asleep, but as soon as he gets staked, that's when Barlow finally wakes up and he's like, no. He does the whole like can't be vampire thing. This takes multiple strikes of the vampire, the stake and the hammer, but eventually Barlow he does die, and his body disappears all the way down to just his teeth. No spaces in between the teeth, and they are lined up in kind of a weird vampire smile. Um, all the vamps awake at this time, um, but they are basically protected by the holy water that they had doused themselves in. It kind of forms a circle around them. They basically leave Salem's Lot. Mark faints. Um, Chapter 15, Ben and Mark. They stop in New Hampshire, and I'm gonna have to explain that Ben faints for a long time. It's a couple of weeks before he actually like literally wakes up. Um, they stop in New Hampshire. Ben watches the news. Narrator explains how the town slowly dies and turns. It's done through like newspaper clippings and a couple different things. It buries Jimmy and scatters Barlow's teeth. Um, Ben also buries Mark's parents and heads back to Mark. The epilogue is newspaper clippings of strange events following Salem's Lot. All back from Las Sabatos, Ben and Mark chill in Portland, then head back to Salem's Lot. They drive back to the site of a great fire from 1951, and they watch Salem's Lot burn, claiming to continue vampire hunting. And that's basically the end of the book. That last part is like it's kind of like real fast and stretched out, but it's like to in an explanation. And this is going to be one of my questions because it's one of the weirdest thing in the book. But it's a year that's spaced out in these weird newspaper clippings, and it's been basically watching the news of the events of Salem's Lot branching out into other cities, kind of thing. And it's kind of the book's way of saying that this isn't over, kind of thing. Um, but in a nutshell, that's everything. So I finally do have some more questions now that we're finally done with all this crap. Because I mean, look at that's just one fucking chapter, and that just sped through like, I mean, if I went, man, that this one page is like 5 hours of the book, like, jeez. Um, all right, so there's one part that I'd like to touch base on. I don't know if it caught you off guard. It caught me off guard because I'm a Western fan, Western movie fan. I love Westerns, like TV shows. But okay, so and King is himself Western fan, but there's a part that mentions Parkins went to the theater with his wife at one point, and this is one of the reasons he was getting out of like out of being a cop. But he mentions that he went to a movie with his wife that featured more blood than the Vietnam War itself. Well, what Western movie did he watch? Because I don't know about you, but up until the 80s, most Westerns were more like kind of Wizard of Oz type movies. They had like, they were
Yeah.
like fight scenes where they never really connect. They were like shootings where you never even saw blood. The guys just like fell over rooftops and stuff. So what
Yep.
what movie do you think he's talking about, this Western that was more bloodier than his version of the Vietnam War?
I'd have to think. I'm not huge into westerns, but I've seen quite a few old ones, and I kind of so you're saying it seems like it's usually more about the scenery and whatnot. Um, Definitely nothing with Bruce Wayne, excuse me, John Wayne. No, no Bruce Wayne either, for that matter, I guess.
The
Um,
only the only thing I can like, and to give reference, because our Dark Tower series is based off some movies, and like, and Clint Eastwood's The Good, Bad, the Ugly, the Dollars trilogy comes to mind. I've seen all three. They're bloody, but they're not like, I mean, if you're talking about like some westerns that are bloody, I'm gonna go to Tombstone or Bone Tomahawk, some more modern, versions of westerns.
I haven't seen any of the what's his face, the oh, I can't think of his name, spaghetti
Clint Eastwood.
westerns.
I actually love those movies. Okay, like especially if you are not a Western fan, I cannot recommend those style of Western films because they're not traditional Westerns. They play on these weird tropes. They're like, because it's basically Italy's version of like our view of how we saw the West. So it's this weird, like, they really thought there was like super gunmen running around. I don't know. It's a fantastical idea, and it
Let's see,
plays out really well in movies.
gory. I'm googling classic westerns.
But for Stephen King to like, as book and movie heavy reference as this person is, like, for one, I was surprised that he didn't come right out and say the movie. But then, because it's straight, like, it's so like off the wall when Parkin Gillespie tells the story about him and his wife going to this drive-in theater and watching this, because it's literally 20 minutes of the story, and
Yeah,
he breaks character and tells Ben the story about why he's quitting being a cop, kind of thing. And I'm sitting here, man, I've seen tons of westerns, especially from up, because it would have been 50s up into the 70s. They would have been doing western shows and movies, and this like blew my mind. I was like, what movie did he see that was so bloody
yeah.
that
I mean,
he
I'm
compared?
looking. I had googled what are gory classic westerns, and it gave me a short list of about 8 gory. It says brutal westerns.
Yeah.
There's only 2 that are after 1978, and of this entire list, I only know Django. Um, so I guess that they existed. If we were thinking that this took place in 72, 71, am I right?
Yeah.
It could be Ulzan's Raid, which I'm not familiar with.
I'm gonna have
Um,
to go check that out.
yeah, there's 2 from 1971, The Lawman, and where's the other one? Ulzan's Raid. Okay, I guess only one from 1971, so it's got to be one of those two,
The Lawman or Django. I know Django is
or
pretty.
Ulzan's Raid.
Or is answered. Okay. I'm
Yeah.
gonna have to see, because I've seen Django, and I don't, especially compared to the more recent Django, like, that one's like mildly tame.
Oh no, it is saying it's the most recent Django on that
Oh,
list.
okay, 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 okay,
Yeah,
okay.
because
Because there
the
there
other
is.
there's another movie from the 2000s or 2016. I'm not familiar with Outlaws and Angels, so it does go into some more modern things. But those are the only 2 from I'd say the last decade.
All right.
Yeah, it doesn't really go into. I googled it. I don't really have an idea of how brutal it is. It's just says it's brutal.
I just thought that was like so off wall. Not even the reference of the name of the movie, but like how it's brought up. It's in the story, like relation to like wanting to quit being a cop kind of thing. Like, yep, I saw this bloody western and I based my view on the world on that, and that's it reminds
Mhm.
me of the movie Old Men, you know, uh, No Country for Old Men.
Mm.
Because that's kind of the concept in that story is like, the cops trying to fight this new breed of criminal kind of thing, and his cop style is just being, outdated kind of thing. Um, and to relation, that's just what the reference is. But I was just, maybe
Yeah.
curious if you had thoughts on that. Okay, so a real question. So after we get to the part when Callahan is defeated, right?
Mhm.
His church specifically is used twice after that by Ben and Mark. Um, would you trust his church after you found out he got defeated as a priest, kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, I would trust the church because, I mean, being a Catholic, we're taught that a church is the house of God. You know, it's not the priest or the preacher. And even I don't know if you're going to get to that part when Callahan tries to go back into his church. You see that there's a reaction.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, I would trust the church. I would figure that'd be the safest place to go in town.
Well, the book shows us. I mean, it's a more me question because the book does show us that does play merit that because they do go back to the church and when they're getting the holy water, like, and that's one of the things I didn't highlight during my description, but there is a lot of like magical use once they start getting into the whiteness because when they dip um, when they're dipping the holy water lights up during the whole attack on Barlow. Um, like to get into the cellar, the little door, and that's another small reference that he uses later on. He uses little doors for like his main bad guys, like Pennywise from It is behind a little bitty door like that. A couple other bad guys are behind little doors like that. Um, but when he uses that axe, he actually coats it in holy water and a blue flame emits from the axe to the point where, like, when he's axing at the door, his whole arms are covered in this, like, mystical blue flames and stuff. And once the other vampires start waking up, this mystical blue flame, everywhere that they've touched, the blue flame kind of forms a circle around them, protects them. Also, like every time and the movies kind of do that, where the vampires around the crosses kind of light up, kind of thing. Um, so I want to say the book does show us that the church is still
Yeah,
just a good church. It's really just Callahan kind of thing. My whole thing was like, was that a thing that I'd go to? I don't think I would have done that. Like after I found out Callahan failed as a priest, I don't know if I would have went back to his church. I would have went to another church, but Callahan's church, I would have deemed it like not as good or like,
yeah.
even though that's not how churches work. But
But think of this. Think of this. Look, you're in Salem's lot, right? You're presuming you don't have your car readily available for whatever reason. You're on foot. You got to hide somewhere. It's not like they have eight, churches in town. They have this one church. Logically, in the town, that's the safest place to go. If you're going out of town, have
yeah,
at
you
it.
got to play. Yeah,
But
yeah, you're true.
yeah, and the way they make it sound is like it's not like here's Salem's Lot and the next town is 5 minutes that way. It sounds like it's kind of in the boonies.
All right. All right. So I got one for you. And the next question is Ben comes off very determined, easily a very solo guy. I mean, doesn't seem like he needs the companion of many until he gets into a crisis event, and then he demands that people stay with him at all costs. Why do you think that is? And what is King trying to say about friendship towards evil? There's many times in the book, and
Mm-hmm.
I I'd like to demonstrate the determined because Ben rolls into town on his own. Comes to a whole new town. He's wanting to rent this evil house on his own, not being scared. Has the fear tied to him as a kid, kind of thing. Hey, Brian.
Right.
Um, throughout the book, he demonstrates not only like leaderish qualities because he is kind of the leader of this ragtag group, right? But I feel like throughout the book by himself, he's good until they get into those situations. And it's like In the end of the book, Ben's all freaking, like Mark's all freaking out because he doesn't want to go back into this house where his parents die. And Ben's like, "No, come on, man, I need you. I need you." He does it with Susan. He does it with Ben. He does it with Matt.
I mean, I think it's because at that point in the book, I mean, look, pretty much everybody he's met in this town. Like I said, look, King spent a lot of time painting this to be a very picturesque, everybody knows your name type of place. By but in the first half of the book, the second half, we see all these people either get brutally killed or become vampires themselves and turn these other people into vampires.
Mhm.
So I think it's a little bit out of maybe some fear that, hey, look, if I leave this kid alone, something's gonna get him, something's gonna happen. Um, I think it's also, and I didn't really get this impression until the very, very end. I think he, in a way, feels responsible for what happened to the kid's parents. Because what would have happened? I mean, you can't really say that it would have been avoidable, but if Ben decided never to come to town, yeah, no, they would have been wiped out anyway. But for some reason, I feel like Ben has a little bit of that, I guess, survivor's guilt.
I think that's there. And that's like that whole description at the end when they do that whole year stretch, because
Yeah,
that's kind of my last question before we get to the movies. Like, I love the story, and there's parts of it that I didn't remember until I was rereading this, and I was like, man, it's such a great story.
I have a
But then
couple
we
of
get,
things I want to get into too.
but then we get to the end, and they do that whole like where Mark faints, and they just decide to travel all the way to Mexico, and like they stay there for a year, and there's no rhyme, reason besides like maybe you can say Ben's watching the town to see what the other vampires do, but like he eventually goes back to town and just like not only like burns the whole town, and I will say there's regular people still living there. That's expressed. It's not all vampires. Like so he just kind of burns the town at
Yeah,
night while everybody's sleeping.
and
Um,
I mean, to be honest with you, that was the most haunting thing I found about the book. So, like I was saying earlier, up until if you wanted to get into it and you want to bring it up later, just cut me off. But yeah, I mean, look, as I was saying earlier, every point in this book, you're following your general vampire lore. They don't like sunlight. They hate steaks. They don't like garlic. They don't like white roses, which we're still trying to figure out where it came from. But in all traditional vampire stories I've ever read or seen, whatever, as soon as you kill the main vampire, everybody else either dies or goes back to normal. So here, when Barlow's killed, he withers up and goes into dust and whatnot.
mhm.
But the other vampires are still around. Like there's a minute of, hey, why did you do that? But
All the other vampires in this story that they kill
yeah,
with stakes or their bodies stay. Barlow's the only one who like disappears, and that was actually another one of my questions. When Barlow is killed, how come the chain doesn't break? Like, how come like all the other vampires stay vampires, kind of thing?
and that's
Like,
what's the creepiest thing about this story because there's no okay, it's over. It's oh no, these are like vermin themselves. Like we saw rats and everything.
mhm,
Yeah, you see one rat, you know that there's 50 rats,
mhm,
and you can't just kill one. You got to get them all. And you see, even when Ben runs to Mexico, which I think he did in fear, to be honest with you, because you figure Mexico is usually sunny and hot, not where a vampire wants to go. I think it was a little bit of okay. I hear these things are going on because they're more and more. You can see the vampires, even without Barlow, are like, all right, well, we're just going to get whoever else is left here, whoever happens to be passing through, that type of thing. So Ben's got his eye on this, and then he comes back with the responsibility of okay, I got to get rid of all of these guys. But but yeah, I mean, to me, that was the most haunting part of the story is the fact that yeah, it's not game over, you know.
no, and he kind of leaves it with that open ending because he does reveal the newspaper clippings, and he shows
Yeah,
that the vampires are kind of like a vein. They're spreading out from Salem's. Um, Trev brings up a good point. What about the rabies shot?
I
During the whole Jimmy
hated
thing.
I hated the rabies shot.
Okay, so my whole thinking into that was the guy was a doctor, right? And he's like, you're thinking with your like fictional mind versus your like reality mind, right? So he goes into like full doctor mode and he's looking as the vampire thing as like, like a blood disease kind of thing. And that's where I want to say, because it wasn't rabies, it was tetanitis. And tetanitis is more like it's something you get from like metal
Yeah,
rust and um but kind of similar thing. But like, okay, so here's the catch. My whole thinking into that is like he vampires in this like universe have traditional means because we do know that like Callahan doesn't officially like turn into a vampire, and I want to say it they have to be turned the same way. And the book shows signs of that because Danny Glick doesn't like die instantly, and like the second later, comes back as a vampire. There's a tradition of days that happen in between. So I
right.
want to say in this case, he was just bitten, not turned, and he just assumes that he's gonna be turned. He does the whole tetanus thing, like thinking it's gonna help or whatever, and he didn't need to do it, kind of thing. He was just bitten.
I know, but I still just didn't like it. Like it was just like, that's kind of it's cringy.
The
You
way
realize
he freak, the way he freaks out and everything, he's like, "Ah, ah." Like I mean, I know that, like I believe that part to be believable, but like I don't know, just it's a great scene that gets real cringy real quick because of his like responses to everything, like
but
especially with Ben.
the scene in the movie was 10 times worse. I'm sure we're going to get to that. But I have
Um,
one other question regarding the books for you.
yeah,
So to relate this to the Dark Tower, if, in case these people don't know, the vampires are are my favorite part of the Dark Tower, and it's just walk into the restaurant and it's all kind of like it sounds like it's almost like out of something from Dust Till Dawn. That was my imagination there.
very
So
close.
I don't recall. Do they establish at that point that the vampires are part of the Crimson King's army, or are they just kind of adjacent to?
That's where you can get in, like, I guess, many different debates because you could ask that about the Tahine, the doctor bugs, that kind of thing. I
Because
want
then,
to, I
oh,
want to
so go
assume
ahead.
he just attracts evil things, and because he's like Lord of Evil, there's just like this, like, oh, evil master kind of thing,
Right.
and I think he just attracts vampires kind of thing.
Because then, keeping that in mind, and this is something that I don't think King really ever commented on. You know, traditionally, and in these stories in this book, a cross is the way to go when you come into contact with a vampire. It glows, it burns them. They don't like it. Cross is holy. Cross is a symbol of God. I never, I did want to look it up uh, before we had this meeting. I didn't get a chance to do it to see if there's any kind of ancient lore as far as vampires, attachment to Satan, that type of thing. But keeping all this in mind, is he kind of drawing a line that the Crimson King is Satan?
Yes and no. I want to say during Roland's time that could be a yes, but maybe during like Arthur L's time, for instance, that could be a no kind of thing.
Yeah.
I think like through the Crimson King's evolution is like maybe his gainage of items and his you know gained him that power. Especially as we've seen in the grapefruit and stuff like that. I mean, his psychic ability has reached as far as like, and I think that's just what it is. It's just it might be a glamour that he's able to infect these vampires and then they work for him, kind of thing. It might not necessarily be like, oh, he's Lord of the Flies. Um,
Mm-hmm.
it could be. it- I mean, imagination's fun, and I think in this scenario, I would have to imagine that Crimson King didn't have this like group meeting with vampires and Tahine and like and he was like, well, you're gonna work for me now, kind of like the Sauron thing. I think it's more
Yeah.
like they're just attracted to him, and I think due to their qualities, he just favors. these evil things over those, like vampires can glamour and other things. And we do know in the Dark Tower series, glamour is a big thing, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and that's kind of the point in Crimson King's ending is the Wizard of Oz to me. He just had magical, and that's kind of, you know, a little dude with a bunch of power, kind of thing. And Tina brought up something earlier I wanted to highlight real quick. I did for a second, but could be white roses symbolize purity and innocence, good versus evil. I love that. I think
Yeah.
that's probably what it is, and I don't know why I didn't catch that. That's probably exactly what it is. Um, all right, so we're running out of time real quick. But I would do want to touch base on the 1979 made for TV miniseries that came out. It was originally dropped for CBS in two parts. It's basically 3 hours long. It's like an hour and a half each night with commercials and stuff. Um, I have thoughts on both movies. Both
Oh, I have
movies.
plenty of thoughts.
I want to say both movies do a good job up until like 80%, and then they just kind of like do their own thing. The TV series, I want to say, keeps it a little closer. They just basically end at Barlow's house instead of doing the whole Eva Miller thing. And
Mhm.
they have so many of the great scenes. They even have my favorite stair scene, but they just did it backwards. Instead of him falling down the stairs, he's grabbed and impaled on a wall that has knives. Like I was like, why didn't you have him fall? Um,
Network TV, I guess.
yeah. Um, I want to say the original is probably the better adaptation as far as close to the book as like, compared to the two, because I'd say the new one did a really good job up until 60%. And then it just was like, no, we're going to do our own thing. Um,
I think you're being very kind with the new one.
okay, so I liked both. The new one now is a little harder to watch. It is dated. It was made for TV, so it's not the best of cinematography, but for what it is, it's a great vampire flick. I love the acting that was in it. I want to say nowadays, most of the actors that are in it are like unknown to even like a 40-year-old movie watcher. Um, they were probably popular at that time, and I have who played, but they were still pretty unknown to me. But I recognize a couple people, like the guy who plays. I think it was Mike Ryers or whatever. I recognized him. A
Oh
couple
yeah,
other people.
Fred Willard.
Mhm.
Yeah, he was the big
Um,
one.
but like David Soul, the guy that plays Ben, he was new for
Yeah,
me.
he just
And
passed away.
I want to say I did like the new version of the Lewis Pullman guy. They got to play Ben. I'd say that's more my when I was reading the book. He's kind of like the version of Ben that I imagine. I do like the David Soul's interpretation of Ben, but it's like the hair or something that throws me off. He just looks like too manly, or it's like they got somebody that doesn't even look like a writer kind of thing. And it's sad because he pulls off the writer moments perfectly. Like I believe that he was a writer. Just it was like every time he wasn't away from the typewriter, I was like, yeah, I could see him like either playing some beach volleyball, posing for some pictures, or like
Yeah.
about to hop in a jet, fighter jet.
See, he came off at first too old for me to be Ben. Like I always picture Ben to be more like in the newer
That
movie.
too. Yeah, that too.
I'll say this though: by the end of it, I was like, you know, I've shared before. I'm a big fan of the Castlevania video games growing up. By the end of it, I was like, that's Simon Belmont, 100%. Oh, Mikey Freeze. Oh, not that right.
No, I was reading. I didn't know that. Trav was saying that's Bill Pullman's son. Glad to see him. He's a great actor. I didn't know that Lewis Pullman was Bill Pullman. But Lewis Pullman was new. This is the first time I've seen him. A bunch of these actors in the Salem Slot movie was new, minus a couple of people.
Did
All
you
right.
recognize in the old one Suzanne?
Yes, and Larry, the guy that plays Larry Crockett, the realtor.
Yeah,
Um, I forget where I know the girl from, but she was
Die Hard.
like a yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah.
And I actually really liked her in this. I thought her version of Susan was a lot better than the new version, because that's the thing. I liked parts of the old one. I like parts of the new one. Um, I want to say some of the actors in the new one, it's like they got them, and then some they don't. Like I like the little kid that they got for the new one. I even like and that is something that they did in the new one. They kind of race swapped some characters, which I didn't mind because in the original, it's kind of funny because it's like they played it like they condensed characters' parts and merged them into two, like they took two or three
Yeah, and
characters and merged them into one role kind of thing.
I get that. I mean,
Yeah, it was made for
major
TV.
the major problem I have with the new one, I have to say, is I feel like I understand you're going to have to take a lot of stuff out, but I feel like the stuff that they added detracted from the overall storyline. With the exception of, I liked the concepts of the final scene. I was like, oh, that's actually something interesting. But I mean, I felt like, and I read that it was the same director who did Crank.
Hmm.
Um, and it made a lot of sense after I read that because I felt like he was more interested in bringing the story down to the level of either like an action slasher
Like a
movie
moviegoer. Yeah, because the ending
than,
was like that.
well, the whole movie was like that.
That's what I'm saying. Like
And
it
it really, I mean, I'll tell you, one of the biggest peeves I have in any movie where you have like a horde of villains, um, when and that Terminator Salvation was kind of the same kind of thing where, you know, hey, you had these robots that used to take friggin' rocket launchers and get up to be fine, and all of a sudden they could get taken out by an AK. The vampires towards the end of this movie, yeah, you know, you had trouble staking them in the front. You know, they couldn't get through. But if you turn around and get them from the back, it just goes through like jelly. So the moral of the story: if a vampire is attacking you,
get him from
trip
behind.
trip him, and then boom.
Yeah, that yeah, there was a couple scenes that
Yeah.
happened twice in the movie. Okay, so my biggest complaint, and this is affected by both movies, is both movies suffer from not having the true main villain be a main villain. Like
Oh yeah.
both interpretations like dumb down Barlow to this non-speaking creature like form. Now in the new one, they did give Barlow speaking lines, but they took out all the times that he was like the sneaky villain. That like they minus the scenes where he was, got rid of the roses. They minus the scene where like they walked in the house and there was a
Yeah.
trap. Like they minus I mean they had him in the most easily comical places. Like in the new one, he was in the like drive-in theater with all the cars. Like in the old one, he was just in the Marston house. Like
Yeah.
I
I
want to
mean,
say that was my biggest flaw between both films is that they focused more on Stryker as a villain than they actually did on Barlow. Like Barlow was kind of in the background.
that was definitely a problem. I think in the older movie, they just basically made him, you know,
Yeah,
for any video games fans, kind of like, um, what was that big monster in Resident Evil, Nemesis,
yeah,
where it's like, yeah,
or
he's
Mr.
just a,
X.
yeah, he's just a monster. And
Yeah,
in fact, the first time that you do see Barlow, a good look at Barlow, I should say, in the old one is just in the jail, and it was like, oh, okay, that's just weird.
no, the first time you see Barlow is actually in the old one. He kidnaps Ralphie Glick, and all you see is his arm come down and grab
Oh yeah, that was
Ralphie,
goofy too.
and
Yeah,
Ralphie flies up in the sky. That's actually the first time you see Barlow. But you're right. The official first time you see him is in that jail cell.
yeah.
Um, and
I
now and they just use him as this like background monster kind of thing. Even when you finally see him and stuff, he's just like in that scene with Callahan, and I'd say the older version does a way better version than the new version. But the older version, it's like Barlow does all the speaking lines, like
yeah,
"drop down your, shaman." And Barlow doesn't even speak at all. At least in the new one, I'll say that's the majority of the speaking lines is that scene with Callahan or whatever. And I like the way they did the crosses in the new one and stuff like that. But
but
like,
no, I think the biggest problem the old one had, where I don't know if they were like, hey, let's fill in some gaps so it's like so we can get it into two parts.
yeah,
I feel like they were trying to paint the town kind of like King did, but within network memes. You know, so you're not going to have too much. You're not going to have the woman beating up the baby. I knew that was going to get cut out either way. And they take the time to do that in the first one, but not enough. Um, you when you it feels like, all right, we introduce these characters, and then in a lot of cases you just don't really add up to anything anymore. Like, I don't know. Like, I was like, do we need to see the woman cheating at this point? Yeah, you'll see her later on, but it just didn't have the same kind of gravis as the book.
Grandioso. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
And to your point, it didn't those storylines didn't without that, they didn't amount to anything kind of thing.
yeah. And the
Um,
new one, forget it. I mean, the biggest.
I don't
I'll
even
say this:
remember if that's in the new one.
it isn't. They really
Yeah, I
don't
was about
touch
to
on the town too much at all. But the two biggest issues I have with the new one, besides Barlow, which he's not even really my biggest issue in it, um, I think it dumbs down a really great story by telling us too much. You know what I'm
yeah,
saying?
kind
Like,
of. I would agree.
both stories, both versions, I think did a great disservice by cutting out that whole scene with Floyd where he beats the shit out of Ben and he has to be all covered up and everything.
Yeah, and the weird vinyl gloves and
Yeah,
stuff.
because in the new version, it's kind of like there's no discussion of, oh, this is a virus, or it's like, no, it's got to be vampires. Only logical explanation.
Yeah,
Like they got to that way too quickly. But the whole, like the very when you actually see the sacrifice and what happens to the little boy, I mean, it would have been great in a slasher movie, but this should not have been a slasher movie. This is supposed to be something that builds.
that's
And
in both versions. It's like the scenes that they did at. Okay, first off, like when you start the original, CBS made for it starts off like the first scene you see is already wrong. The for some reason in the miniseries they decide to do the Los Zapatas scene in Guatemala.
mhm,
And so they didn't just cross a border. They traveled to a whole nother, they got on a boat and went to a whole nother country kind of thing. Okay, so that's my first real issue is that it just starts off like not only I don't know why I can understand maybe they couldn't use Mexico at that time due to this, who knows. But it's just really weird that they Guatemala of all places, like
that didn't bother me as much because the sense I got was more they're not running to run; they're being actively hunted.
see in the okay, and that's the other thing that the original movie displays that the book or the new movie does not. At the end of this, that not only does Ben and Mark burn down Salem's Lot or whatever, and hopefully killing a good general, vampires or just getting rid of their hiding locations, but they also mention that they're going to continue the vampire hunt kind of thing until it's
Yeah.
over. And the original movie, it's more like, nah, they're running due to fear, and the vampires are chasing them, kind of thing. The holy water starts glowing. They're like, oh no, they found us, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know where that came from either, because that's never displayed within the novel. You know,
I've said this. So the other huge issue I had in the second movie, all in all, the characters are done so poorly. Stryker was just it was it was like they got the guy on. He's like, let me act creepy in every single scene, like overly creepy. Like, to be honest with you, before anything started happening, if I was the cops, I would be at his house like, what do you plan on doing? Because you're
but
really
okay,
fucking creepy.
both versions of Striker, it's like they did that, but the newer version, it's like they went like Willy Wonka
It
with
was
them. They were like,
cartoony. Yeah.
they were like, let's put him in this like the most ridiculous suit that no one would wear, and then give him like this weird ass like beard slash hairstyle, like, and then have him act like super like pedophile creepy. The
Yeah.
whole no, but
And
the original was just as creepy. It was like he didn't have the whole pedophile thing going, and they did he at least he was wearing regular suits, but still it was like they still focused on this like Stryker is supposed to be in the background. Like most people mention Stryker, and they either had a pleasant like interaction with him or a forgettable one where they didn't really notice him, kind of thing.
yeah, I mean, in the
Yeah,
book, they made him almost charming towards the other people in
yeah,
town.
because they
Um,
all the people that were actually doing like either bad or evil stuff, like Ann Norton, she went to go
mhm.
meet him, and she was like, "Oh, he was so lovely." Like Mabel, the queen of the gossip, he literally pulls out a 300-pound throne for her when
Yeah.
she's in the shop, kind of thing.
But I no
Yeah,
like
you
the
ain't lying,
first
Trey.
the first the older movie, like Stryker gave me Mr. Belvedere vibes. This movie, the current one, I had more like he's trying to do an impression of Laszlo Cravingsworth from What We Do in Shadows. Like it was
Yeah,
just cartoony and dumb. And again, they tell us too much. Like, okay, in the book, we knew maybe it was Stryker in the woods hunting them. We didn't. He never pulled up. Hey, do you boys need a ride? Like that kind of really
yeah.
creepy thing. And it
That's what I'm
was
saying. The scenes
yeah.
that they chose to like add, and it's
And
like,
then
what?
they
Why?
show him. They show him like kidnapping the woods. Like, no, you're already telling me too much. And
Yeah, you're taking
even
away.
the friggin' vampires in the new movie. First of all, every single one of them, I wasn't scared of any of them. Like they just came off as goofy. And of course, what do? They say, again, it's a whole mystery in the book. Like it's going to be Barlow and Stryker, but you know, these people don't know what it is. But here, every single vampire starts talking like, "Oh, my master Barlow wants to talk to you." It's like, why not just tell him everything? And
No, I was thinking like, okay, in the book, there's actually like levels of detectiveness that goes on. They're
yeah,
putting, and it's not just like one person or two people. It's like numerous people that are putting all these clues of the stuff that's going on in this town, and you get that from everything that's going on in the town. The movie, that's how they summed it up. They're like, you know what? Instead of having our characters intelligent, we're just gonna have the vampires tell them everything. Yeah, Barlow's our master, and like the way they just uncover that they are vampires is like so non-believable in the new movie, and it's so quick. It's like,
yeah.
yeah, vampires.
But even like,
The only one that I believe, and I hate to say it because she plays, I assume they got her for this role because they knew she was going to act that way, because I love the actress, but she almost always plays the character the same way with the person they got for Dr. Jimmy Cody or whatever.
yeah,
And like not only was she just gung ho believable and everything, the Empire, let's do it. Like exhume a kid and
yeah,
go against my practice. Let's
sure.
do it. And like the way she like acted it off, I was like, why didn't they get her to play the sheriff? Or why didn't they get her to play like Floyd or like
I'll say it, I hated hated the vampire in the morgue. They're like, "Oh, here we can hold you back with a cloth." Yeah, I started laughing. You know what it reminded me of? Remember the chain chomps from Super Mario Brothers?
oh yeah, yeah, being
That
held
that
up in
was that was
chain.
totally. I was like, this is just comedy at this point.
Like they had, well, okay, so you mentioned that he directed Crank, right? He also like okay, so the new one is executive produced by James Wan. And one second, I had to get some tea. Um, okay, so it is executive produced by James Wan, and then the director is also like the known. He's also done most of the Conjuring universe, either as the
Yeah.
director or like sub director. Um, It had a lot of that vibes going on. Like you brought up the morgue scene. She was crawling around like the nun, like looking like a spider, and like my version of a vampire like doesn't have to do all that. And I get that this has some base on those old Hammer films with the more violent vampire, but like none of that was featured besides their movement. It was like, why are they
Yeah.
moving like this? And another thing was like in the new version, all the vampires were like immensely dumb, like they only remembered like a couple things. You're talking about in the book when Marjorie Glick wakes up, she's not only like looking for her son, but calling for him, asking for him, like knows where she is, like
Hmm.
recognizes who's in front of her, like before she attacks him. Like and on top of that, the book kind of like highlights that once they like turn into vampires, they don't have any struggle with knowing their powers. They're shown flying, using hypnotism, like turning into mist at will. Like the new movie kind of makes it look like the vampires are still trying to figure that out. Like
Yeah.
when she's trying to run away from them, she does it in a human fashion versus like, well, I can move like 10 times faster than a human can. Like,
Yeah. I mean, the way the vampires are treated, it tells me that I don't know if it's the writer, I don't know if it's the director, I don't know if it's everybody, just didn't understand. or maybe they skipped over um, King's prelude to the whole novel because he says, "Hey, look, these are vampires that will just tear the crap out of you." So what you once you get that impression in your mind, the book and even the older movie, to a lesser degree, does a good
Yeah,
job of that. These
but they
is kind
both
of
they
yeah,
both understood that like that some of these vampires kill and some of them, some of them are turning people, and the people they turn, there was like a plot and a rhyme to it in the novel and in the original. The new movie was just like everybody's turning, like
yeah. But the new one was so. I'll be honest, it was so frustrating. By the time they leave the church, I'm like, can somebody just fucking kill this guy? Really, I don't want to see this anymore. And then even the way Barlow dies, like, look, King doesn't do deaths well. Okay, I didn't like how Barlow got killed in the book, but it at least made sense. Here it's like, oh yeah, no, I snuck up behind him.
right. Okay, so my we haven't even touched base on one of my biggest complaints about the new film, and that's Susan herself. No disregard to the actress, I think she might have pulled off the look to some regards. Like,
She
I
looked
think
like
she,
Fazira, whatever her name is. She was in The Craft and Almost Famous.
yeah,
Yeah,
if anything, she kind of reminds me of the main character from The Stand and what, because Wa- Wa- Molly Ringwald played her, and she kind of had that look going. So it's like,
yeah, a little bit.
I want to feel like she was homaging that, but like, okay, Susan's not supposed to be the prettiest girl in the city, and in this movie she was. Like they mentioned that like two or three times. Like I can get past that, but then it's like there's things in the book like, and I get there's different type of romances, but it's like the way that Susan was in this. It was like I was trying to figure out if she was into Ben. Like, is this going to happen, or was this going a different way? Because it was like, yeah, she was kind of like coming on to him strong, but at the same
Mhm.
time, I kind of felt it was more like the writing thing versus like a romantic interest, like,
But I think that's more of a problem with Ben's character because Ben's character in this new movie, I feel like they really did little to nothing to really build him up. It's like he's a writer, his wife is dead. There you
he
go.
got no backstory. No, he
Yeah,
got no
and that's why
backstory.
it was like, all right, just kill this guy, just kill him.
They didn't do the whole his history with the Marston,
Yeah,
like in
but
the
to the
two different forms.
yeah, but to the point where, like, I honestly in the second movie I did not care about him at all. Like, just kill
That's
him.
what I'm saying.
Yeah,
In the new movie, they didn't. I mean, you're talking about they did not do his whole like. Yeah, I
and
mean,
I
he briefly mentions that he was from Salem's Lot, and that's only brought up in defense to like Parker Gillespie during that one scene. But then, other than that, like they don't mention him in his history with the Marston House and the Snow Globe. They don't do the
right,
whole like part where he's researching Hugh B. Marston. They don't even. I don't even think they mention Hugh B.
they do
Marston in the
not,
new one.
they do not.
Like, and you talking about one of the best parts of the story is this
Yeah,
house surrounded in this like horror element.
and even the old one, even though they didn't mention that, did you catch the little homage to Hugh B. Marston in the old one?
I'm trying to think. What was it?
When we first see Mark in his bedroom, which I hated the kid who played Mark in the old one. I'll say that he was like let me try to do a Mark Hamill impression.
Okay, I did and I didn't. There's like there were times when he I felt like he pulled it off, but then there were other times it was like, how did this kid get the part kind of thing? Because he is not like
When you're in his bedroom though, and you see all the little monster figures and everything, he has a marionette hanging, I think, from his bed of a
I
like a
did know.
green guy. Yeah, I was like, oh,
Yeah, I did notice that.
but yeah, I
Um,
just like I the Hugh B. Marston thing is intensely interesting, and they both just like, we don't need it.
yeah, and like it kind of like defeats the whole purpose of like them focusing on the house, which both movies did to some regard. I'd say the original does a lot better of making it kind of the focal point of the town without going in detail about the house, which is kind of weird because it's the focal point of
Yeah, I knew that the new movie was trouble when it first started because think about think about some of the movies that you've seen in the past. The first scene in a movie is supposed to be one that sets the tone for the whole film. It catches the mood, it catches the feeling. So usually, if it's an action movie, you have a big action scene. If it's a horror movie, you have a scary scene. What is the first scene you see in this new movie? Arguably the most boring part of the book, when Stryker is giving the movers like, yes, you must do this. You must put the lock on the door. Like, why would you open a movie with this creepy dude? Like, you have to
I
lock
forgot
this
about that.
because it was so shitty.
I couldn't
That's why
remember
you
how the
forgot
new
about it.
movie opened. Yeah.
But
Um.
I mean,
o- Okay. So to highlight that, it's a scene that both there's two scenes in both movies, and I don't know why they got representation in such a strong influence. But you brought up the wharf scene with the whole delivery guy. I don't know why that's such a big scene in both movies. The original made it look like Striker's coughing. I mean, Barlow's coughing, moving, doing all the
yeah,
weird shit. Like, maybe for horror elements. Maybe I guess whoever read the book didn't think there was enough horror elements and enough, and there is. Like, there's a couple like scares. Okay, I don't know why the emphasis on that scene. The other scene is them actually in the fucking store. Like, that's not a huge, that's like a brief line in the book. Like, once, like, I want to say it's like literally like four sentences in the book of like them talking about Ann Norton going to the store and Mabel getting the throne brought out and somebody purchasing one thing. No one physically goes in the store. There's
yeah,
never, none of the main characters go in there. There's never a time where we even get we don't even get the name of the fucking store. There's never a mention of like what the store was going to be called. That's how so insignificant the store was. There's like a couple scenes in the book where they briefly touch base in the store, but it's more about the house. But seeing like both interpretations, they were like the old has like a 30-minute scene with them going into the store and talking to Stryker, and I'm like, where the fuck did they get all this?
yeah, yeah. But I mean, I think going back to Hubie for a minute, I feel like showing a flashback of Ben just going into the house and getting freaked out, not even seeing Hubie, or maybe just seeing a quick flash, would have been a great way to open this movie. And then it would have been a tie-in to bring in at a later point. But
I
yeah,
was thinking either that or the
yeah,
motorcycle accident. Like they didn't, either or. Like you could have started out, and that's part of the reason that he was coming back. Or I would have liked that one with him going in as a kid trying to become the pirate or whatever, and
yeah.
grabbing the snow globe. Or I could have done either or. There's another fascinating thing about this new movie with Callahan. Okay, so I
Oh,
did
yeah.
I did like the actor that played Callahan. I will say I don't like that none of his accent or, I mean, he's supposed to be an Irish Catholic priest with a pretty predominant, um, like accent in the book kind of thing and in the Dark Tower. In the new movie, they straight off kill his ass off. Like that, he doesn't even like vanish or nothing. Like,
Yeah.
nah, they straight off kill him. Okay, and this is coming around the time when we're about to get Dark Tower stuff, and you're killing off, like you're talking about a connected universe that connects to other Stephen King stuff, and you're gonna do a movie where you kill off a direct character that you know is gonna be in this other stuff. Like,
Well, both films, I should say, did shit the bed with this scene completely, because this was your most powerful in the book. This is the most powerful part in my mind when you see Barlow. This is when
yeah, it
you're like,
is.
all right, this is a badass. And like the first movie when he bent the cross, and then the second one it's just like, oh, we're gonna just do a quick cut and we're on to the next thing.
He just
It,
drops
it,
it on the ground.
yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, if they do say, if they do a Dark Tower series, I'm still not 100% positive they're going to do it. Confident, I should say, that they're going to do it. My thought is we have to get ourselves away from this version completely,
Yeah, I'd
and
agree.
it would make sense because this is Warner Brothers, and then Prime is the discussion for,
Yeah,
yeah. So two different companies. It's the same like Spider-Man, Sony, Marvel, kind
we're
of
safe.
situation.
We're safe.
Yeah,
I haven't even seen King's thoughts on this, or I tend to stay away from, especially when it comes to his movie adaptations, because he's had such a muddled. I even wonder if he gets viewings of these, if he's like, yeah, I love that. It's a great take. Like, I mean, I have to wonder, well, because I was okay with this movie, like, honestly, up until like 60%. Then we got to the whole like Ann Norton thing being like this protector for Barlow and the whole shotgun stuff and the
Honestly, I'll say this: I liked that aspect of it
did
because
you
they had just,
I didn't
well, they
mind
had,
it. I didn't mind it.
yeah. I mean, it made sense. It was a nice little kind of surprise.
I like that it was
Um,
different, I'll say that.
yeah, and they honestly they had thrown everything out by that point anyway. So I was like, hey, look, that works.
It's
You know,
good.
because at first when they said, "Oh yeah, my dad's dead," I was like, "Oh, he was like one of my favorite townspeople in the book."
Well, that's like if you go back and watch the original and you have favorite characters, maybe like Jimmy Cody or maybe like Mike Ryerson. Some of them characters are just like merged into others or not even
Yeah.
there. And it's the same thing with the new one. It's like the characters they ditch. It's like the whole McDougal thing. I mean, even though how horrible it is, I still would love to see that. And I feel like that would be like, you're talking about a scary ass scene. That's scary, that kind of stuff. And I can see why they didn't. But in a movie
Mm,
that's rated R, I kind of feel like that should be one of the scenes that's in there, or the dude falling to his death, getting impaled by a bunch of knives. Like,
yeah. See, I thought with the new one, I didn't realize it was rated R until you just said it because I felt like they were trying to go for the PG-13.
I want to say like that it pretty much is PG. Like, there's not really too many scenes that I can remember. Like, I
What
don't even remember.
What did you think of Barlow's appearance?
Nah, I did in the old one. In the old one, yeah. I mean, it's okay. In the new one, no. I mean, in the book, you're talking about he's supposed to be like tall, slender, bald, like
Mm-hmm.
no hair. Like,
Yeah, the old one.
honestly, I don't even remember how Barlow dies in the new one. That's how vaguely I remember. All I remember is like the couple creepy scenes, like where he drives up and approaches the kids, him doing the whole like cemetery
Oh,
ritual thing.
Straker.
Yeah, and then I can remember the scene where they go in the store and they're talking to him there, and the cop talks to him. Besides that,
I,
I don't
I
even remember how he's taken out.
I think Mark just bashes him a bunch of times.
It's the
I kind of
same
forgot
thing.
it too. Yeah, and look, as cool as Mark is the best character in this whole movie, the new one. Like they need to talk about, okay, why is this kid like surprising, like almost like psycho level good at killing people? He's got a bigger body count than anybody else in this
Right?
thing. Even
No,
with, yeah,
in the new movie, he had a surprising body count because that was another thing, and he was way more apt than Ben was, and it's kind of the opposite in the book. Like, I mean, Mark is apt, but not as apt, and I mean, Mark was the gung ho one,
yeah, yeah. I will say
or
this, even
Ben.
though it's not part of the discussion, being that I read the book, watched the old one, watched the new one, and I said this in our chat. I watched Return to Salem's Lot. That makes the new one look like freaking Gone with the Wind.
So we haven't really discussed that, but I stay away from, and there is a type, okay? So, and this was famous during the 80s and 90s. I don't even know how this was allowed. But Stephen King started allowing like un they're basically like fan-made movies, and there's a bunch that come to mind, but like because he did this one movie, sometimes they come back. And if you go look, there's sometimes they come back again, sometimes they come back part three. He's done this with, well, not he. They have done this with other movies like Children of the Corn, and there's like
Mhm.
six sequels to it. Pet Cemetery, and there's like two sequels. Okay, so there's a lot of his movies that were like really good. And for some reason, he allows these companies to come in and do these like
Money.
these,
That's some
yeah,
reason.
yeah, and none of them have been good. Now, I've back in the 80s and 90s when I was a kid and being a huge Stephen King, I was like, yeah, I'll watch Children of the Corn too. It's bad. I watch Pet Cemetery. Yeah, it's bad. Like, there's never been a single time where like someone continued one of his stories and it turned out to be good. I'm pretty sure they're out there. Like, I'm pretty sure I could come up with a great continuation to any of these, but these people that got the whole, nah, it was horrible.
I'll say this though: the main character in Return, he was enjoyable to the point where I was like, he would have been a great Eddie if they made a Dark Tower movie. Yeah,
Back
back
then.
then. Yeah.
Actually, well, okay, so there's a couple other like that they've done. Like, because of course you just mentioned that they made a return to Salem's Lot, and I think that was also like it was either straight to DVD, like straight to VHS kind of thing, or it was made, made for movie kind of thing, made for TV. But there's a couple other that are like legit that just didn't make anything. There's this series called Chapel White. It actually stars Andrew Brody. It's very like under the low key. Not a lot of people talk about it, but it's like a prequel to Salem's Lot.
Hmm.
It's specifically focuses on the fire that you mentioned during the 50s kind of thing. Thanks, Trevin. I know we're going late.
Later, Trev.
But there is a couple other. There's also, and me and Trev were talking about this. There is another like series that they did on, I think it's USA, and it was in 2014, starring like Rob Lowe and Donald Sutherland. That one I have not been able to find. I wanted to watch that because I do remember watching that version of Salem's Lot. And I did, it was, as far as I remember it, it was really close to the
Yeah,
novel.
I think it might be. I want to say on Roku channel.
I'm,
I saw.
I did a little because when Trev had mentioned he had saw the new movie, he had effed up and it said he had
Oh, you
watched
saw
the
that one.
2014, and I was like, "How did you see it?" So I kind of like briefly searched for it, but I'm still kind of wanting after now, you know,
Mhm.
rereading the book and having it fresh. That's like Return to Salem's Lot. I'm gonna go watch that just out of curiosity,
I'll say this:
knowing it's
if
bad.
I would love if Ken, when I'm gonna, I think return after I typed into our chat, I'm done with this movie. I was like, you know what? There's a half hour left. Let me jump back in. I will say this: it is the goofiest final fight I've seen. I think in any movie from that era.
I'm looking forward to it.
You have to understand the premise: the vampires are. I don't even know why, but they're trying to
I might
paint
watch this.
themselves in a way where they're like, "Hey, just so you know, we don't eat humans. They're not our preferred snack anymore. We
Yeah,
eat."
you said about the cows
Yeah,
or whatever.
they kind of come off like the Gremlins from Gremlins 2, except not enjoyable.
Mm.
But
Yeah,
yeah, the final fight is just it's ridiculous.
I do want to see it because I know I've never seen that one. Like before this, I had, because I had read Salem's Lot like in my 20s. It wasn't one of the earlier Stephen Kings that I came across, but like as back then, like before I had read the book,
You go.
I had watched this the miniseries movie, and I remember as a kid that I liked it, kind of thing. And the miniseries movie is a great, without the novel, it is a good standalone movie because
Oh
I
yeah,
watching both of these, I use that, is this a good movie? Is it a good vampire movie? Is it a good horror movie? And then I do the, is this a good adaptation to the book kind of thing? I'm looking at those filters as I'm going through it. And the new movie, like, I don't know if I'd watch again. I'd watch again because there's parts of it I don't remember. But as far as, and that's only because, like, hey, it's a Friday night and I ain't got shit to do kind of thing, which never happens with me. There's always new stuff to watch. So guess what? I'm probably never going to watch it again.
you know what?
The
For
old
me,
movie
so good.
was pleasant.
Yeah, no, I agree. I'll say this: the new movie for me, it's kind of like when
Yeah,
you
Hugo,
get.
thanks for
It's
stopping
kind
by.
of like if you ever gotten like sushi from Pathmark. Like
Mhm.
maybe you're gonna try it once, but you're just not gonna revisit it. It's not a pleasant time. I will say this: as far as the books go, if King ever wants to turn around and say, "Hey, I'm gonna make a prequel so you know how Barlow became Barlow," I'd be all in. Like I'm
I want,
fascinated by seeing that.
it was one of the questions, and we were like running out of time. I didn't want to go too late, but it's actually one of the questions. Yeah, I was wondering if you noticed that because there is a storyline, and I briefly mentioned this about the fire that happens in 1951. That kind of comes from like a bunch of articles that are found in the book that describe the town back then going bad, and I kind of wonder if this is kind of a recurring thing. This isn't Barlow's first attempt at turning Salem's Lot bad. Like, there is this story that's in the background about something bad happened, and this guy eventually does burn the town down, and his family fate having a bad, like, kind of curse that follows that fire kind of thing.
Hmm.
I was kind of wondering if you thought
I mean, to be honest with you, my focus was more on. I thought the fire in the back of my head was something from Hubie. To be honest with you, um, and my whole thought was the focus should have been more on the Marston house. Like the way they were describing it, I had the same vibes as the hotel from Shining, and
there's
I
a
figured,
couple of because the Shining is one. I want to say that because that's his next book after this, right?
mhm,
And that whole story being solely about the house that is corrupted by evil kind of thing, and it's holding ghosts there captive kind of thing.
mhm,
Um, but not only that, but then shortly after that, he does like Rose Red, and that it's kind of House on Haunting Hill, Amityville,
mhm,
style haunting story. So I want to say that that's there. Also, leading into that whole like 1951, there is mention of like Hubie and this, him talking to this European called Braxton.
mhm.
Um, I was always wondering if that was possibly either Barlow using a different name or a whole nother like powerful vampire, and then he came in and failed, and the white stopped him kind of. I don't
Yeah,
know.
I always assumed it was Stryker, thinking that he's kind of like Barlow's Renfield.
That's how I always saw him, was like
Yeah,
Renfield, and like I saw him as like more like Alfred Pennywise, like Renfield. Not necessarily the way the adaptations have shown him to be this
oh
like
yeah,
either whimsical or this highly because either versions are just super noticeable and super questionable, like where the cops would be questioning things about the character's story, like because I mean, telling a story to regular people, none of it sounds believable. Yeah, my partner, and he's from Europe, and his name is Barlow, and he's in New
yeah.
York on some mysterious. I mean, everything sounds fishy about that
But
crap.
that's why Straker was so valuable to Barlow because he could charm them. He could sell it. I was like, all right, yeah, this guy seems whatever.
And the best scene with that was with Larry Crockett and that whole like him coming in to buy both plots for $1 and him convincing him. But the deal that Larry Crockett gets out of that with all his land because he makes shit millions, and then on
Yeah,
top of the millions, he does the whole trailer thing and makes millions off of that. No, I don't know. Phil, I want to thank you big time. We're two
thank you.
hours and 30 minutes into this. This was so fun. I'm glad you stopped by. I'm glad I got to talk Salem's Lot with somebody. It was, I mean, this is a great Stephen King book, especially for like his second book that he put out.
Yeah,
Um,
and I'll say thank you for inviting me, of course, into this talk with the Dark Tower talk, because I really enjoyed this book, and I wouldn't have even thought about picking it up hadn't it been for that awesome scene in the Dark Tower.
Heck yeah, man. I want to thank everybody that stopped by. I mean, it was a long talk and everything. I hope, and people enjoy this kind of thing, get something out of it. Maybe add to the conversation. Comment down below. If you're watching this on the rewatch, maybe we missed some stuff. You know some stuff that we didn't catch. But guys, that's everything. I'm gonna end this. We're gonna get out of here. Thank y'all. Bye.
Later.